Aetius, the Western Roman general, understood what Attila was doing. His entire career was spent playing tribes against each other to defend Rome. He had allied with Huns earlier in life to defeat Visigoths, Burgundians, rebels, and even Roman armies during civil war. Aetius knew better than anyone that Attila did not need to conquer the West militarily. He could collapse it politically. Another critical area Attila studied was the Italian peninsula itself. Italy had become a fragile heartland protected more by geography than by legions. The Alps offered natural defense, but Italy lacked manpower. The once great Roman military system, based on citizen recruitment, had disintegrated. Italy relied on mercenaries and foreign auxiliaries. Goths, Huns, Moors, and Franks served in imperial ranks. Attila understood that these troops fought for money, not loyalty. Economically, Italy was deteriorating. The Vandals had seized North Africa, cutting off critical grain shipments. Cities like Rome and Ravenna faced food shortages and inflation. Farms decayed, and villa aristocrats hoarded wealth. Attila recognized this as weakness. Starting cities defend themselves poorly. Culturally, Western intellect was fading. Few Roman schools survived, book production decreased, and historians lamented that people were forgetting their own past. Attila, who valued oral memory and warrior tradition, viewed this academic decay as symbolic. The Romans were losing identity while the Huns remained unified. Attila also studied Roman road systems. The empire retained a sophisticated highway network connecting Gaul and Italy. If Hun armies control these roads, they could move faster than Rome expected. Scouts mapped river crossings, food storage sites, horse grazing regions, and safe winter camps. Attila knew exactly where he would march before the invasion even began. The fact that he lost the field did not mean defeat, it meant reassessment. The Roman coalition, led by Aetius, celebrated the battle as a triumph. Yet behind the celebration, fear lingered. They knew Attila had not been shattered. They knew he would return. The Visigoths, who had played a crucial role in preventing the Hun breakthrough, emerged from the victory with equal pride and equal trauma. The death of their king, Theodoric I, overshadowed success. Funerary songs echoed across Visigothic territories, reminding everyone that even victory demanded blood. This death also destabilized Visigothic leadership. Thorismund and his brothers were now positioned to inherit power, but rivalry between siblings always carried potential for civil conflict. Meanwhile, Aetius faced complex strategic dilemmas after Chalons. Historians debate whether he intentionally allowed Attila to withdraw because he feared destroying the Huns too completely. If the Huns disappeared from the geopolitical board, the Western Roman army would again have to face increasingly ambitious barbarian tribes without assistance. Aetius understood balance of power politics centuries before the term existed. He had benefited from Hun alliances earlier in his career, and he may have envisioned using Attila again as a counterweight to other threats. Thus, Aetius allowed the Huns to leave Gaul rather than pursue them recklessly into uncertain territory. Attila, retreating back toward the Hungarian plain, used the time to analyze the failure in Gaul. In his mind, the breakdown at Chalons was not a military collapse. It was a failure of luck, weather, and battlefield coordination. His forces had not been routed. They had simply failed to annihilate the enemy. And annihilation was always his goal. Once back in his homeland, Attila reorganized his forces. He held war councils with his generals and with the leaders of allied tribes. Some criticized the outcome in Gaul. Others accused Roman treachery. Still others believed the gods had denied final victory. Attila listened, silent as always, weighing words rather than reacting emotionally. From intelligence reports, he learned that Rome believed itself safe. Bishops claimed God had intervened against the Huns. Latin poetry boasted that Roman civilization had triumphed over barbarism. Attila found these boasts amusing, even infuriating. To him, Rome had not won. It had merely delayed its death. The idea that Roman leaders celebrated while his armies still existed angered him deeply. Revenge burned hotter than before. Attila also recognized something important. Rome was weaker than Gaul. Italy lacked a leader like Theodoric to rally tribes around resistance. Italy was isolated by geography, drained economically, dependent on Africa for grain, and nearly defenseless militarily. The Western Roman army stationed in Italy was tiny. Defensive walls were old. Morale was low. Attila realized that if he struck Italy with the same intensity he used against Thrace, the heart of Rome could be reached. This shift in perspective marked the beginning of a new strategy. Attila would abandon attempts to dominate Gaul and instead target Italy itself, the symbolic core of Roman identity. Destroying Gaul would have brought territory. Destroying Italy would bring legacy. Attila wanted to be more than king of the Huns. He wanted to be known as the conqueror of Rome, successor to Hannibal and Alaric. In Attila's political imagination, the Western Roman Empire had one purpose left: to become history beneath his footsteps. The period immediately following Chalons was filled with political reorientation across Europe. The Western Roman leadership desperately wanted to believe that Attila was defeated, but the reality forced them into uneasy vigilance. Aetius and Emperor Valentinian III spent months reinforcing diplomacy among barbarian allies to prevent new uprisings. The Visigoths, recovering from their king's death, drifted toward internal conflict. Thorismund, the successor, wanted to return home rapidly to secure the throne before his brothers challenged him. This decision, though logical, weakened Roman coalition unity. Gaul's defense system fractured again. While Rome unraveled diplomatically, Attila rebuilt with astonishing speed. His empire remained a multicultural powerhouse. The Ostrogoths, still bound to Hun authority, replenished manpower. Gepids restored formations. Syrians and Rugians trained new recruits. Hun workshops manufactured thousands of arrows, saddles, bowstrings, helmets, and spearheads. The losses at Chalons, though significant, were replaceable. Nomadic societies reproduce military strength faster than sedentary ones. Attila also tightened his political control. He executed or demoted commanders who showed incompetence or hesitation. He rewarded those who demonstrated loyalty and cleverness. The battle had sharpened his inner circle. Those who remained were hardened veterans willing to follow him anywhere. This restructuring eliminated doubts and restored unity. Simultaneously, Attila resumed correspondence with the Eastern Roman Empire. Even though Emperor Marcian refused to pay tribute, Attila threatened renewed invasion. Marcian, however, had reorganized Eastern finances and military forces. He felt more confident than Theodosius II, and for a time managed to hold Attila at bay through strong posture rather than gold. Attila, recognizing the East was no longer a golden river, prioritized the West. This refocusing aligned perfectly with the Honorius scandal described earlier. Honoria's request had not been forgotten. Attila still claimed she was his rightful bride. He insisted the Western Empire honor the marriage agreement. Valentinian III rejected the idea and even attempted to deny Honoria's existence publicly. Attila responded by asserting imperial insult. Rome had stolen his rightful dowry, half the Western Empire. This legal framing gave him ideological justification. Warriors love battles with moral narratives. Attila provided one. Additionally, Attila maintained his image as chosen by divine powers. Prophets, shamans, and holy men within Hun culture pronounced that the gods had withheld victory in Gaul only to deliver a greater victory in Italy. Attila embraced this prophecy publicly. Women, elders, nobles, and warriors became convinced that the next campaign was destiny. Belief strengthened morale beyond physical preparation. Meanwhile, the Western Roman Empire wasted precious time with internal politics. Court officials argued over payment distribution, military command, and aristocratic honor. Some nobles even accused Aetius of designing the Chalons campaign to make himself too powerful. Valentinian III grew suspicious of Aetius, his most competent general. Paranoia spread through Ravenna's walls. Instead of planning for Attila's return, Rome consumed itself through mistrust. In Gaul, Roman control dissolved quickly. Local populations, devastated by war, abandoned farmland and moved into fortified settlements. Food shortages rose. Disease followed. Under these conditions, Attila's propaganda spread easily. Some communities believed the Huns would bring better fate than imperial taxation. A conqueror gains strength not only through armies, but through the failures of the society he attacks. By the time winter ended, Attila's decision was made. Italy would be the target, not just to intimidate, but to break. The empire had lost Africa, much of Spain, and Gaul was slipping away. Italy alone remained untouched by direct Hun destruction. Attila would change that. He assembled the largest Western invasion force of his career. Veterans from Gaul returned to his banners. New levies from Germanic tribes arrived. The Hun cavalry reached peak strength. Support wagons carried children, wives, priests, and wealth. This was not a raid. This was a migration of war. Rome censait Duma Prochain. Every message from scouts intensified panic. Attila was coming, not as a raider, but as a king pursuing vengeance. And he would bring the storm to Italy. As preparations for the Italian campaign intensified, Attila refined three major components of his invasion: logistics, psychological warfare, and geopolitical strategy. From a logistical perspective, the invasion of Italy was a massive undertaking. Unlike Gaul, Italy offered geographical challenges. The Alps were a formidable natural barrier. River crossings were narrower. Food supply sources were limited. Attila addressed these issues through careful planning. He ensured his forces included engineers who could dismantle mountain obstacles and build bridges quickly. He also chose the route across the Julian Alps, a path historically used by Roman armies and merchants. Scouts confirmed its feasibility for mounted units and wagons. This ensured speed and minimized losses. He also organized livestock caravans, horses, cattle, sheep, to provide continuous food supply. Unlike sedentary armies that relied on grain depots, Hun forces carried their mobile economy with them. Warriors were trained to survive on minimal rations. They cut meat into strips to dry under saddles, ate wild herbs, and drank fermented mare's milk. Their doctors knew how to treat frostbite, saddle sores, infections, and sprains. This adaptability made them nearly unstoppable in harsh terrain. Psychologically, Attila prepared Europe for terror long before his armies crossed into Italy. Rumors of his approach spread through monasteries, markets, and military encampments. Children whispered his name at night. Priests preached repentance to avoid divine punishment. Rome, once confident in its superiority, now faced existential dread. People believed Attila was a supernatural destroyer. Attila encouraged these beliefs. He did not counter tales of demonic origin or prophetic destiny. He used silence as affirmation. He ceased diplomatic communication entirely, signaling that negotiation no longer mattered. His ambassadors delivered only one message: prepare for war or beg for mercy. He also communicated strategically with religious leaders. Attila sent messages assuring bishops that he would spare churches and holy places if cities surrendered peacefully. While he rarely kept such promises, the message served a purpose: division. Civilians pressured governors to capitulate. Soldiers questioned the value of resistance. Morale collapsed before any swords clashed. Geopolitically, Attila also calculated timing with extreme precision. Italy in early 452 was suffering environmental disaster. Crops had failed the previous season. Flooding along the Po River damaged infrastructure. Plague outbreaks weakened population centers. Attila saw natural disaster as opportunity. When a society is weakened by climate and disease, armies defending it collapse faster. Meanwhile, Valentinian III continued to distrust Aetius. Instead of empowering him, the emperor undermined his authority, reducing supply access and questioning his loyalty. Rome was destroying its only hope of survival. Aetius, seeing betrayal imminent, focused on diplomacy rather than battlefield preparation. He wrote to the Visigoths, urging them to remain allied against Attila. He sent envoys to the Eastern Empire begging for military support. But Marcian refused to help, claiming his own territories needed protection. Hun body modification customs also shaped identity. Elongated skulls, created by bandaging infant heads, served nobility aesthetics. Scars across cheeks mark bravery. Tattoos may have existed, though evidence remains uncertain. Hun gender roles, though traditional, were not oppressive by ancient standards. Women controlled household wealth, negotiated marriage terms, and owned livestock. They also influenced diplomacy through family connections. When judged by objective criteria, craftsmanship, oral literature, social structure, spirituality, the Huns clearly possessed civilization. Their cultural legacy, though overshadowed by wartime reputation, deserves recognition. What makes Hun society remarkable is that it thrived without cities or stone monuments. Their achievements lived in motion, in language, memory, migration, and art. History, too, often measures greatness by architecture and written archives. The Huns challenge this assumption. They show that civilization can exist through movement rather than monuments, through identity rather than walls. The daily world of the Huns reveals a people who lived with intensity, creativity, and connection to their environment. They shaped history not because they destroyed cities, but because their way of life challenged Europe to evolve. Hun civilization may have vanished physically, but its cultural DNA remains alive in Eurasian traditions, nomadic symbolism, and the collective memory of nations shaped by their movement. To truly understand the Huns, historians must go beyond military history and examine the spirituality that shaped their worldview. The Huns lacked written scriptures, leaving only fragments of belief recorded by Romans and preserved in archaeology. But absence of writing does not mean absence of faith. In fact, spiritual identity guided Hun diplomacy, battle tactics, burial practice, family order, and even cultural aesthetics. Their religion blended deep ancestral worship, animistic belief, and cosmic symbolism rooted in steppe cosmology. At the core of Hun spirituality was the sky. The Tungri belief system, widespread across Central Asia, viewed the sky god, often referred to simply as the eternal blue sky, as ruler of all destiny. Many historians believe the Huns followed a proto-Tingristic worldview. Evidence comes from their rituals, praying to the heavens during oaths, watching stars for signs, and orienting burial sites along cosmic directions. The belief that the king held divine mandate came from the sky. Attila himself was viewed not simply as king, but as a chosen agent of heavenly will. When Attila won great victories, people said the sky blessed him. When he failed in Gaul, some believed the gods withheld victory to prepare greater destiny in Italy. Complementing sky worship was ancestor veneration. Clan identity centered around honoring the spirits of the dead, who were believed to influence fortune, fertility, battle success, and weather. Every family kept oral genealogies stretching back generations. In Hun camps, elders sat beneath stars recounting memories of forefathers, teaching youth that identity came from lineage rather than possession. The Huns believed ancestors walked with them in battle. Dying with honor meant joining them. Some warriors claimed visions of their ancestors before combat, interpreting these appearances as good omens. The natural world also carried sacred meaning. Animals served as spiritual teachers and protective symbols, especially wolves and horses. The wolf symbolized cunning strength, speed, and pack loyalty. The horse symbolized freedom, identity, and nobility. The horse's spiritual importance explains why horses were buried beside warriors, especially nobles. Archaeology shows horse skulls arranged in ritual patterns next to human graves, symbolizing the journey into the afterlife with trusted companions. The Huns also practiced shamanistic rituals. Shamans communicated with spirits, diagnosed illness, predicted war outcomes, and mediated between worlds. They used drums, smoke, chanting, trance dancing, and sometimes hallucinatory herbs to enter spiritual states. Roman writers described Hun shamans wearing strange clothing, feathers, bones, and animal hides. Though Romans recorded these descriptions with disgust, modern anthropologists recognize them as typical of Siberian and Mongolic shamanism. Shamans determined when armies should march, when marriages should form, and whether dreams carried warnings. Dream interpretation was especially powerful. Roman sources mention Attila interpreting dreams as political prophecy. One tale recounts that Attila dreamed of a goddess giving him a sword, a sign he believed predicted universal conquest, whether literal or symbolic. Such stories reveal that dreams were treated as instructions from the divine. The Huns also believed in fate. When defeat or hardship occurred, they did not question the gods' justice. They assumed destiny had shifted and adapted accordingly. This fatalistic worldview strengthened discipline. Unlike Roman soldiers, who sometimes panicked when facing strategic setbacks, Hun warriors believed that surviving defeat simply meant the gods had not finished with them yet. Fire held enormous significance. Families lit sacred flames inside yurts to connect with ancestor spirits. Fire purified weapons and warded off curses. Ritual flames burned during weddings, funerals, and oath ceremonies. Destroying property by fire was seen as returning matter to the spirit world. This explains why the Huns burned cities not only for strategy, but for spiritual symbolism. Burial practices further reveal religious structure. High-ranking Huns received elaborate burials filled with gold ornaments, weaponry, horse remains, and finely crafted objects. These goods supported the spirit in the afterlife. Attila's burial, though shrouded in myth, reflects this concept. The triple coffin legend, iron, silver, gold, symbolizes strength, wealth, and holiness. Burial secrecy shows belief in protecting the king's spiritual power. Death was not feared, it was transition. Warriors welcomed heroic death as passage to the spirit world. Cowardly death, however, condemned souls to dishonor. Funeral chants, wailing, and feasts honored the dead. Families cut hair or scarred cheeks to symbolize mourning. These rituals united community identity through shared grief and remembrance. The Huns lived spiritually in every action, from daily work to warfare. Religion was not a separate institution. It was life itself. Another dimension of Hun religious identity comes from their relationship with Christianity and Roman spirituality. When the Huns entered Europe, they encountered societies filled with churches, clergy, saints, relics, and sacred buildings. At first, the Huns did not attempt to destroy Christianity. Instead, they observed and tolerated it. Many Huns lived among Christian tribes, and some even adopted Christian practices while still following steppe belief. For instance, Hun leaders often allowed Christian bishops to remain in conquered towns so long as they paid tribute. Attila himself negotiated with multiple bishops while invading Italy. Records show he respected religious diplomats because he understood spiritual authority impressed masses. Hunters and herders who saw priests praying under torture mistaken them for holy protectors. Attila exploited such perceptions strategically. He knew that if he appeared invulnerable to religious messaging, fear would intensify. The relationship between Huns and Christianity became complicated. Some Christian captives joined Hun society and married into their tribe. The descendants of these captives introduced Christian symbols into Hun art. Archaeologists have discovered crosses engraved on jewelry found in Hun territory. While this does not prove conversion, it shows Christian influence was present. Many Germanic tribes under Hun rule were already Christian, especially the Goths and Alans. They practiced Arian Christianity, a theological branch separate from Roman doctrine. When these tribes integrated with the Hun military structure, they brought their faith. They prayed beside Hun warriors, carried crosses into battle, and preached sermons in camp. Such coexistence created a spiritual mosaic within Hun society. While the core Huns remained shamanistic, their multi-ethnic empire possessed widespread Christian contact. Some scholars argue that the Huns, especially Attila, respected Christian spiritual figures more than pagan Roman generals. Pope Leo's success meeting Attila reflected the overlap between spiritual diplomacy and steppe tradition. Steppe societies valued holy men who represented collective consciousness. So when Leo arrived, Attila recognized spiritual authority, not Roman government. Meteorological omens, economic strain, disease, and the Pope's arrival all symbolized destiny aligning toward withdrawal. Another overlooked aspect of Hun religion involves burial timelines connected with lunar cycles. Archaeological sites indicate burials aligned with moon orientations. The moon symbolized regeneration, travel between worlds, and continuity. Burial orientation reflected belief that souls traveled eastward toward dawn. Hun society also practiced food offerings. Archaeologists find animal bones beside hearths in ceremonial layers, suggesting ritual feasting beyond mere dining. These offerings communicated respect to spirits, ancestors, and landscape forces. Italy was alone. Attila's scouts reported that northern Italian fortifications were weak. Cities like Aquileia, Milan, and Verona lacked strong garrisons. Villagers were already fleeing into mountains. Farms lay abandoned. Roads were clogged with refugees. When Attila saw these reports, he spoke the same words that chroniclers later recorded. Rome is an empty shell waiting to be cracked. For the Huns, the Italian campaign was more than opportunistic invasion. It was a chance to engrave their legend into global memory. Killing the Roman Empire on Roman soil would transform Attila from conqueror into myth. His followers believed they were marching not just for wealth, but for immortality. Thus, Europe braced for the most terrifying Hun offensive ever launched. The invasion of Italy in 452 CE stands as one of the most dramatic military events of late antiquity. For centuries, Italy had been protected from massive foreign invasions by the formidable natural barrier of the Alps, by Rome's famous legions, and by the aura of Roman might. Even Alaric, when he sacked Rome in 410, had not marched across Italy through the sheer force and sweeping scale that Attila now commanded. Attila was not coming as a raider to pillage a city and disappear. He was coming as a conqueror to unmake the spiritual heart of Rome. After careful preparation in the previous winter, Attila directed his enormous army toward the Julian Alps. This was a monumental logistical movement. Tens of thousands of mounted warriors, thousands more infantry troops, wagon trains loaded with children and supplies, blacksmith carts, livestock herds, and slaves marched slowly but confidently toward Italy. Modern historians estimate that the march may have stretched for miles, a living river of people winding through narrow mountain passes. Hun scouts rode ahead to report terrain, possible ambush sites, and weather conditions. Their horses were small but strong, bred especially for endurance. No Roman cavalry could match their ability to climb steep ridges at speed. Crossing the Alps required incredible resilience. The mountain air was harsh, weather unpredictable. Snow remained on upper paths, even in spring. But the Huns were forged in cold and hunger. They had grown up surviving winters on the open steppe, sleeping under horse blankets, and drinking melted snow. Mountain terrain could slow them, but not stop them. Those who could not march were left behind, as Hun expeditions tolerated no weakness at the front. Attila himself rode near the center of the formation, surrounded by elite guards. His presence maintained unity. If the king advanced, no warrior would dare falter. Once the Alps were crossed, Attila entered the heart of northern Italy. The first great target was Aquileia, a fortified city that stood guard along the Venetian plain. Aquileia was not just a military center. It was a symbol of Roman civilization, home to commerce, wealth, and Christian bishops. The city had resisted barbarian pressure before, and the Romans believed its defenses could delay Attila long enough for Aetius to assemble reinforcements. But Attila had learned from Chalons and Thrace. He would not allow another long siege to destroy momentum. He brought rams, towers, and hundreds of archers. The siege of Aquileia was brutal and unrelenting. Hun engineers, some drawn from conquered tribes who once served Roman armies, constructed siege towers from local timber. Large stones from city ruins were shaped into ammunition for catapults. Hun archers fired thousands of arrows daily, targeting defenders on walls. Inside the city, panic grew as supplies dwindled. Some accounts describe desperate citizens eating stray animals, bark, even leather to survive. Bishops led prayers, hoping divine intervention might save the city as it had saved Orleans. But Attila showed no hesitation. It is said Attila nearly abandoned the siege when the walls held longer than expected. But according to legend, he saw storks flying away from the city. He interpreted this as a divine omen. If birds had lost hope, humans inside would soon do the same. Whether fact or myth, the siege intensified afterward. Roma morale collapsed. Hun forces breached a section of the walls, poured through the opening, and devastated the city. Aquileia was burned to the ground so thoroughly that historians later wrote the site disappeared from maps. Refugees fled into swamps to survive. The destruction of Aquileia signaled the beginning of a dark chapter for Italy. News of Aquileia's fall spread rapidly. Roman towns surrendered before the Huns even arrived. Panic overtook the northern countryside. Mothers hid children underground. Priests carried relics toward the Alps. The Roman aristocracy realized that Attila had achieved something terrifying. He had breached Italy's northern gate, something not even Hannibal had done on such scale. Behind the destruction lay purpose. Attila was not wasting time. He was proving Italy vulnerable. Rome had boasted divine favor, yet its powerful cities now burned. The Hun invasion created a psychological wound deeper than any battlefield defeat. The Huns had crossed the mountains, and no one could stop them. The fall of Aquileia opened a wide floodgate into Italy. After burning the city, Attila divided his forces and unleashed multiple raiding wings across the Valley. This fertile region, filled with vineyards, farms, and wealthy estates, had long supplied Rome with food and tax revenue. Now, it fed Attila's army. Cities such as Vicenza, Verona, Altinum, and Padua either surrendered or were destroyed. Archaeological ruins bear scars consistent with mass burning, abandonment, and population displacement from this period. Attila allowed surrendered cities some mercy, often demanding tribute, horses, food, and weapons rather than total destruction. But those who resisted paid with fire and blood. In each conquered settlement, Hun generals enforced terror discipline. Resisting towns were burned publicly to terrify neighboring regions into surrender. Messengers rode ahead of the main army, explaining that submission guaranteed at least partial survival. Word spread like smoke. Villages opened their gates without a single arrow fired. By this time, Attila's army moved with frightening order. Cavalry units operated in staggered formations, ensuring constant offensive pressure. Warriors hunted freely for fresh meat. Horses grazed on Italian grasslands, open, soft, and rich. Compared to the hard steppes, Italy was a paradise. Some Roman writers lamented that the very landscape fed Rome's destroyers. Meanwhile, Emperor Valentinian III hid in Ravenna. Protected by swampy terrain and strong fortifications, he refused to face Attila directly. His mother, Galla Placidia, begged bishops to negotiate. Roman citizens accused their emperor of cowardice. Many wondered if Attila would march directly on Ravenna and in the Western Empire in a single blow. Ravenna had not been built to withstand nomadic cavalry armies, but its marsh defenses gave it advantage against direct assault. Attila, however, did not immediately target Ravenna. Instead, he turned towards cities with symbolic meaning, Milan and Pavia. Milan, once the imperial residence for Roman emperors such as Constantine, represented the authority and memory of Roman greatness. Attila knew that burning Milan would send shockwaves through history. When Attila arrived, Milan collapsed in panic. The Roman population fled toward the Alps and to Genoa. Those who remained surrendered. Ancient writers recount that Attila entered the city and found a painting showing Roman emperors seated upon thrones while Hun kings knelt at their feet. Attila allegedly ordered the painting altered to show himself seated upon a throne while Roman emperors bowed before him. A powerful message to his court. Rome's age had ended. Whether legend or truth, such symbolism reflects the psychological reality of Attila's invasion. Even more catastrophic was the outbreak of famine and disease. Italian towns were not prepared to feed tens of thousands of refugees. As populations collapsed inward, granaries emptied. Food shortages led to riots. Corpses filled city wells. Disease spread along river valleys. Attila's army, accustomed to harsh survival, weathered these conditions with less suffering than Roman civilians. Aetius, once Rome's greatest general, was now trapped in a political nightmare. Valentinian III no longer trusted him and refused to grant him full command authority. Without unified leadership, Roman troops scattered. Aetius attempted to gather allies again. Burgundians, Visigoths, Franks, but the coalition was too exhausted from challenge to march south. The Visigoths, dealing with their own succession struggles after Theodoric's death, refused to travel far. Italy stood alone, and yet, despite his advantages, Attila faced one growing problem: hunger for his own troops. Italy had suffered years of disaster. Crops were low, livestock numbers reduced, storehouses empty. Attila had brought large herds from Hungary, but cattle die faster in humid climates. supply stress threatened to weaken his campaign if he pushed too far south without securing major granaries. Another issue was disease. Italy's marshlands produced malaria and fever. Steppe warriors had some immunity to cold weather illnesses, but suffered more in warm climates. Behind a myth of unstoppable Hun fury lay real biological vulnerability. Attila knew speed was essential. He had to strike Rome itself or force surrender before his army's strength faded. Roman propaganda during the invasion shifted. Priests did not call Attila the Scourge of God as punishment anymore. They called him divine instrument, signaling the end of the world. Panic was complete, but Attila was still not satisfied. He wanted Rome itself. Every burned city was a message. Every surrendered town a stepping stone. The world watched northern Italy burn and wondered, would Rome, the eternal city, truly fall? The invasion of northern Italy revealed Attila's brilliance, but it also exposed the Roman Empire's fatal internal collapse. Rather than rally against him, Roman leaders spiraled into conflict, contradiction, and fear. One of the most dramatic examples of Rome's broken political system was the emperor's reliance on religion rather than military force. Knowing that armies could not stop Attila, the imperial court turned toward spiritual solutions. Pope Leo I, one of the most influential religious leaders of the 5th century, saw crisis as opportunity. Rome's political authority was dying, but the church's moral authority was soaring. Bishoprics across Italy petitioned for guidance. Priests claimed that visions and dreams foretold divine intervention. Many believed angels would descend to stop Attila, just as they believed angels had protected Constantinople in earlier centuries. Religion filled the void left by empire. If Rome's swords could not defend the nation, perhaps God's word would. While this spiritual atmosphere grew, Attila considered next steps carefully. His original plan may have been to march on Rome directly, but reports from scouts revealed troubling realities. Plague outbreaks, limited fodder for horses, shrinking food supplies, and collapsing wagon infrastructure. The farther Attila moved into Italy, the weaker his logistical stability became. He needed massive, safe grazing land. Yet the Italian plains were being stripped bare by refugee movement, war damage, and crop failure. In addition, the Eastern Empire under Marcian sent forces across the Danube into Hun territory. Marcian gambled that Attila, distracted by Italy, could not defend his homeland. This strategy worked. Attila could not ignore a threat behind him, not when his entire confederation depended on the Hungarian plain for survival. Every horse, family, and supply caravan ultimately traced back to homeland territory. Even a small Eastern Roman army could cause catastrophic economic damage if it disrupted fields or settlements. Still, Attila refused to retreat. He wanted a diplomatic victory that would echo through time. Therefore, instead of storming Ravenna or risking disease on the march to Rome, he positioned his army in the Po Valley and demanded Roman submission. His ultimatum included marriage to Honoria and significant imperial territory. He believed that if the Romans accepted, he could end the war without losing troops. Rome, terrified and exhausted, sent an embassy to negotiate. The delegation included 3 key figures: Pope Leo I, the Roman prefect Trigetius, and the consul Gennadius Avienus. Their journey north remains one of the most iconic events in early medieval history. Many legends surround their meeting with Attila. Some say Leo confronted the Hun ruler alone. Others say angels appeared behind the Pope, frightening Attila into retreat. In truth, the reality was far more political and strategic than supernatural. Leo met Attila along the Mincio River, near Mantua. The Pope spoke not with threats, but with reason. He warned that Rome had nothing to gain from total destruction. He appealed to Attila's ambitions as a ruler, not just a conqueror, offering peace agreements and perhaps gold. Attila listened. His strength lay in silence. He always observed before deciding. Multiple factors influenced him to accept negotiation. Disease spreading in his camp, lack of food, Eastern Roman attacks on his homeland, tactical exhaustion, weakened allied tribes, fear of pushing his men beyond capacity. The Pope's arrival offered a dignified exit. Attila could leave Italy without appearing defeated. He could present his withdrawal as diplomatic honor, not military retreat. And so, astonishingly, Attila agreed to leave. Italy was spared, at least temporarily. When Attila withdrew, the world exhaled. Cities rang bells of victory. Rome believed divine power had triumphed. The Western Empire convinced itself it had survived because God favored Christian civilization. But beneath the surface, the truth was different. Rome was alive only because Attila allowed it. That Attila's withdrawal from Italy in 452 CE shocked the ancient world. It felt miraculous to Roman citizens who believed divine protection had saved them. Yet behind the dramatic image of Pope Leo, the first meeting the Hun king, stood complex strategic realities. The meeting did not defeat Attila. Instead, it gave him an honorable reason to retreat during a moment when continuation had become dangerously costly. His empire was still strong, but internal and external pressures were gathering like storm clouds. Once Attila left Italy, he returned to his homeland in the Hungarian plain, a region that served as the beating heart of his empire. It was from these plains that horses were bred, warriors trained, and political alliances enforced. As Attila entered, thousands greeted him as a returning hero. But this triumphant display concealed growing anxiety within the Confederation. Tribes that once followed him unquestioningly were beginning to fear the future. They had suffered enormous losses in Gaul and Italy. Leaders wondered whether endless war would bring wealth or eventual ruin. Attila's empire needed time to heal, but his ambition refused to rest. Politically, Attila was still unmatched. Subject tribes like the Gepids, Ostrogoths, Rugians, and Syrians remained loyal, not only due to fear, but also because Hun rule offered them rewards: farmland, cattle, gold, and the opportunity to raid wealthy Roman territories. As long as spoils flowed, loyalty persisted. But Italy had not produced expected wealth. Instead of filling wagons with gold, Attila left with fewer resources than planned. This threatened economic stability. Warriors needed payment. War horses required feeding. Royal families demanded gifts. The Eastern Roman Empire also intensified pressure. Emperor Marcian launched attacks across the Danube, pillaging Hun outposts and burning villages. These raids did not destroy the empire, but they delivered a humiliating blow. Hun nobles, accustomed to dominating Rome, were enraged that an emperor dared to carry war into their homeland. Attila could not ignore the insult, but he could not attack Marcian immediately either. His forces were too exhausted and needed reinforcement. Meanwhile, famine struck parts of the steppe. Weather patterns shifted, grasslands thinned, and herds suffered. This environmental decline weakened the empire from within. Nomadic armies depended entirely on horses, and horse sickness threatened military readiness. Attila faced an impossible equation: a warrior society that demanded conquest, a homeland struggling to sustain cavalry strength, and an enemy empire now refusing tribute. He responded the only way he knew: planning another war. This time, Attila intended to return to the Eastern Empire itself and force tribute from Marcian like he had forced from Theodosius. Yet the world had changed. Marcian was no timid scholar. He was a military man with strong generals and new ambition. Constantinople was now financially stable because tribute payments had stopped. Marcian used this treasury to strengthen defenses. At the same time, Attila's own family life grew tense. Multiple wives, dozens of children, and expectations of succession created rivalry. Some wives came from conquered tribes, others from Hun noble families. These alliances made internal politics dangerous. If Attila chose the wrong heir, civil war could erupt. And still another factor weighed heavily. The legend of Onuria had not ended. Attila still believed Rome owed him half the Western Empire by marriage claim. He viewed his Italian withdrawal only as temporary delay. He told his nobles Rome would soon pay or fall. These layers of ambition and vulnerability created a paradox. Attila stood at the height of his fame while simultaneously nearing the edge of collapse. His soldiers adored him. His enemies feared him. But beneath the surface, the empire trembled. Attila intended to restore stability with one final campaign. One more strike against the Eastern Empire to regain tribute, wealth, and fear-based dominance. Yet destiny had other plans. While Attila prepared for renewed campaigns, something unexpected began happening inside his empire. Subject tribes slowly realized that Rome was recovering strength, while the Huns were exhausting theirs. Political tension rose. The Ostrogoths, long loyal clients of the Hun kings, began whispering among themselves. They wondered what would happen once Attila died. Would they be free again or forced into another generation of servitude under his sons? The Gepids, another powerful Germanic group, grew restless as well. Their leader, Ardaric, was especially important, not only as a commander, but as a friend to Attila. It was Ardaric who helped Attila rule indirectly, enforcing discipline across the Confederation. But even he began questioning the sustainability of endless war. If Attila kept expanding, the empire risked breaking under its own weight. Weather served as spiritual text. Solar eclipses, lightning, comets, and droughts were interpreted as warnings or blessings. Hun leaders responded by altering strategy or relocating camps. Romans misread this behavior as superstition. Modern anthropology interprets it as adaptive spirituality, using environment as guide. Even war banners carried religious meaning. The Huns decorated them with animal motifs believed to hold protective magic. Before battle, banners were placed in front of commanders. Warriors prayed for guidance and power. This ritual psychology shaped morale and unity. Hun weapons also carried religious intent. Sword hilts bore animal images intended to channel energy. Bows decorated with spiral lines symbolized life cycles. Arrow feathers were chosen for spiritual meaning. Eagle feathers represented strength, hawk feathers speed. Hun hospitality was sacred duty. Guests entering homes received meat, milk, and warmth regardless of status. Hospitality rituals were spiritual law. Breaking them angered spirits. Taboo rules governed daily life. Certain animals were not eaten during specific seasons. Cutting hair before rituals was forbidden. Newborns received symbolic markings to protect identity. Marriage rituals also incorporated religion. Brides carried charms. Grooms offered symbolic gifts. Sacrificial horses blessed unions. Shamans predicted compatibility by reading smoke patterns. This rich tapestry of belief challenges the idea that the Huns lacked culture. Their religion was vast, layered, and meaningful, connecting earth, sky, ancestors, animals, dreams, and destiny into one worldview. Hun spirituality must also be understood through their emotional and psychological worldview. Steppe religion did not separate life from war. Spirituality existed in warfare, hunger, love, illness, and political ambition. At this same time, Attila's relationship with Western Rome deteriorated further. Valentinian III still refused to honor the marriage claim to Honoria, intensifying hostility. Meanwhile, Roman propaganda turned Attila into a demonic symbol. Priests preached sermons describing him as a divine scourge. Bishop Leo's encounter was retold with mythical embellishment: angels, visions, thunderbolts. These stories frightened Roman peasants, but also strengthened the church's authority. Ironically, Attila's invasion, instead of destroying Rome spiritually, helped solidify Christianity's power. Aetius, still the brilliant commander who defeated Attila in Gaul, remained alive and politically active. But Valentinian III, consumed by jealousy and paranoia, viewed him as a rival. Rather than supporting the only general who could defend Italy again, Valentinian plotted against Aetius, seeking to remove him from office. It was political suicide. Meanwhile, Attila waited like a wolf watching hunters kill one another. Hun ambassadors traveled across Europe gathering information. Reports told Attila that Roman politics were collapsing faster than ever before. The empire seemed ready to implode. Yet paradoxically, this made conquest harder. A shattered enemy cannot pay tribute. Without a functioning government, there would be no diplomacy, no gold, no stability, only rubble. Attila needed Rome intact enough to exploit, but weak enough to dominate. It was during this tense period that Attila made a controversial decision. He took another wife. Her name was Ildiko. Very little is known about her historically, but she was likely a Germanic noblewoman, possibly connected to the Goths or another subject tribe. Marriage alliances were political tools, symbols of unity and dominance. But taking a new wife late in his life introduced complications. Some nobles feared she would influence succession. Others feared her family would gain unfair power. Still others believed the marriage risked offending earlier wives and their children. Nevertheless, Attila pursued the marriage with confidence. He wanted to demonstrate vitality, legacy, and strength, perhaps even to symbolically erase memories of failure in Italy. Preparations for the wedding were extravagant. A grand feast was arranged with limitless wine, music, meat, poetry, dances, and ceremonial oaths. Leaders from allied tribes attended, bringing gifts of horses, slaves, fur, and gold. But beneath the surface of celebration lay anxiety. Warriors whispered fears about the future. Some questioned why the Italian campaign had ended quietly. Others feared the gods disapproved. Still others wondered whether Attila, around 50 years old, was pushing beyond mortal limits. On the night of his wedding to Ildiko, Attila drank heavily, a rare departure from his usual practice sobriety. He laughed, feasted, and enjoyed the company of nobles. Fire torches lit the camp like stars fallen to earth. Music echoed across the plain. For one night, the Hun Empire felt invincible again. But the next morning the world changed forever. Attila, the Scourge of God, conqueror of nations, terror of Rome, was found dead. His death was discovered by alarmed servants unable to wake him. They found him lying beside Ildiko, blood flowing from his mouth and nose, but no wounds on his body. The most feared man in the world had died in his sleep. Shock spread across camp. Suspicion fell everywhere. Poison, assassination, divine punishment, accidental hemorrhage. No explanation seemed sufficient. His death ended an era. Attila's death in 453 CE triggered an explosion of confusion, disbelief, mourning, and cultural transformation across the steppe world. The suddenness of his passing stunned everyone, from wives and sons to generals and allied kings. How could a man who survived countless battles, sieges, and political traps die quietly on a wedding night? Even Roman historians struggled to interpret the event. Some claimed Attila died from a nosebleed caused by heavy drinking, drowning in his own blood. Others believed he suffered a ruptured artery. Later medieval legends accused Ildiko of murder. Some even suggested Roman agents poisoned him, fulfilling secret assassination plans devised years earlier. But none of these theories have definitive evidence. What mattered historically was not how Attila died, but what his death caused. Without Attila's forceful leadership, the confederation he built cracked immediately. His sons, Elik, Dingizic, and Ernak, were powerful figures, but none commanded the loyalty or fear their father inspired. Each son believed he deserved supreme authority. Brothers who had once stood at their father's side now saw one another as rivals. The empire that Attila held together through charisma, terror, and reward suddenly lacked central direction. Internal conflict spread rapidly. The tribes who had followed Attila did not see themselves as subjects of a dynasty. They saw themselves as partners bound by loyalty to a single leader. That bond died with Attila. Ostrogoths, Gepids, Herulians, and Rugians sensed weakness and began discussing independence. The greatest threat to Attila's family came from Ardaric, king of the Gepids. Ardaric had been Attila's closest ally, but he resented Hun's supremacy over his tribe. With Attila dead, Ardaric gathered support among Germanic peoples, preparing to challenge Hun dominance. Meanwhile, rumors spread across Europe that the Huns were finished. Roman scholars rejoiced. Bishops preached that God had slain Attila. The Eastern Empire celebrated Marcian's refusal to pay tribute, believing divine justice had prevailed. Western Rome saw Attila's death as salvation. But the Romans misunderstood. Attila's death did not simply end a threat. It unleashed a storm of tribal warfare on the European landscape. Before Attila was buried, his sons struggled to divide power. Elik, the eldest, attempted to claim leadership over the whole empire. But Dingizic and Ernak refused. Alliances fragmented. Warriors abandoned camps and rode home. Tribute systems collapsed. Internal taxation ceased. Subject tribes stopped sending horses, crops, or manpower. Funeral preparations for Attila were conducted with secrecy and ritual. According to legend, the Huns buried him in 3 coffins. One of iron, symbolizing conquest, one of silver, symbolizing wealth, and one of gold, symbolizing kingship. They are said to have killed the men who dug the grave, so no one could reveal its location. His tomb remains undiscovered today. But even before Attila's body turned cold, war erupted. The Battle of Mideo in 454 CE became the decisive confrontation between Attila's heirs and rebellious tribes. Ardaric led a coalition of Germanic peoples against the Huns. The outcome was catastrophic. Hun cavalry, once unstoppable, broke under internal division. Elik died in battle. His death shattered the dream of Hun continuity. With Elik fallen, the empire dissolved. The Ostrogoths reclaimed independence and moved into Roman territories. The Gepids took control of the Hungarian plain. Ernak led smaller Hun remnants eastward, while Dingizic attempted to fight Rome later, eventually dying in conflict. Attila's empire, once the most feared power in Europe, vanished. The fall of the Huns after Attila demonstrated a profound truth. Their empire depended entirely on the strength of one man. Without him, tribal identity resurfaced and unity evaporated. Rome survived because Attila died, not because Rome defeated him. Europe entered a new age. The Western Roman Empire, though temporarily safe, would fall just 2 decades later. The Eastern Empire would continue, reshaping itself into the Byzantine world. And Germanic kingdoms, freed from Hun domination, would build medieval Europe. Attila became legend, remembered not merely as a destroyer, but as a world-changing force whose death reshaped history just as powerfully as his life. The collapse of the Hun Empire after the death of Attila in 453 CE is one of history's most dramatic examples of how a vast military confederation can disintegrate almost overnight. For over 2 decades, Attila had held together an enormous network of tribes by sheer force of personality, terror, diplomacy, economic manipulation, and charismatic authority. But the empire was never truly institutional. It lacked durable administrative structures, written legal codes, or a hereditary system capable of maintaining unity without personal dominance. When Attila died, the empire was like a tent supported by a single central pole. Once removed, the entire structure fell in on itself. The immediate aftermath of Attila's death was shock. Warriors who had once believed their king was chosen by the gods struggled to accept his mortal fate. His generals were stunned, his allies bewildered, and his wives terrified. Rumors multiplied. Had Ildiko poisoned Attila? Had the gods punished him? Had Rome secretly assassinated him? The mystery surrounding his death increased emotional turmoil. Within days, the question changed from who killed Attila to what happens now. Traditionally, steppe empires selected rulers through tribal councils balancing lineage and capability. Attila, however, left multiple sons, each ambitious, each representing different maternal tribal connections. This became the central source of collapse. Loyalty on the steppe flows through leaders, not flags. Elik, Dingizic, and Ernak believed they all deserved power, and in Hun culture, authority meant domination, not equal partnership. Elik, the eldest and most experienced militarily, attempted to take the throne without compromise. As Attila's campaign commander during major wars, he logically expected full control. He demanded loyalty from every subject tribe, but tribes like the Gepids, Herulians, and Ostrogoths resented Hun domination. They admired Attila, not Elik. They accepted Attila out of fear and glory. Elik offered neither. The Confederation, once a mighty weapon, transformed into a powder keg. Germanic tribal leaders sensed opportunity. They reasoned that without Attila, the Huns would lose military discipline. They had suffered humiliation and economic exploitation under Attila's conquests, paying tribute and serving in wars they did not choose. Now, vengeance felt possible. Ardaric of the Gepids, long considered Attila's most trusted ally, became leader of the revolt. Ardaric understood the Hun Empire from within, how soldiers marched, how horses were fed, how communication networks functioned, and how internal politics worked. He realized Attila had ruled through fear and gold, neither of which existed in the same form after his death. Ardaric gathered former Hun subjects and rallied them around a single vision: remove Hun control permanently. His speeches, though not recorded directly, must have appealed to pride and liberation. He convinced tribes that this was their only chance to break Hun power forever. The Huns, for their part, attempted to hold the empire together through traditional displays of strength. They held grand councils, feasts, and military gatherings to symbolize continuity. But without Attila, these ceremonies lacked emotional power. Meanwhile, Rome and Constantinople watched events unfold with a mix of relief and strategic caution. Both empires had lived in terror of Attila. They had paid tribute, fortified cities, and altered politics because of him. Now, with news of his death spreading by messenger and rumor alike, they saw the future differently. Military patrols increased along borders, not to fight the Huns, but to observe. Rome adopted a wait-and-see strategy, hoping internal Hun conflict would neutralize the threat permanently. Diplomats reported infighting among tribes. Horses were not being distributed properly. Supply routes fell into disorganization. Even marriage alliances broke apart. Without Attila at the center to enforce unity, nothing remained to hold the empire structurally. In less than a year, the Huns transformed from conquerors feared from Persia to the Atlantic into a fractured confederation on the brink of civil war. The collapse reached its most violent stage at the Battle of Nideo in 454 CE, a conflict that symbolized the death of the Hun Empire. Nideo was not just a battle between armies. It was a war between empires, identities, and futures. Ardaric led a coalition of former Hun subject tribes: Gepids, Ostrogoths, Suebi, Herulians, Rugians, Syrians, and others. Their motivation was simple: end Hun dominance forever and establish independent kingdoms on former Hun territory. Elik led the Huns. He believed the gods stood with him. He had inherited the mantle of Attila, but he lacked what made Attila invincible: universal fear and unquestioned authority. The Huns under his command were numerically weaker than those who fought at Chalons or in Italy. Many warriors deserted. Some stayed loyal out of memory of Attila. Others stayed because Elik was charismatic in his own right. But the fatal truth remained: Elik did not command multiple nations. He now commanded only the Huns. The battlefield choice was symbolic. Nideo lay within Central Europe, near former Hun heartlands. This was sacred ground for both sides. To fight here meant to win legacy. When armies clashed, the fighting was brutal. Warriors who once served side by side under Attila now fought as mortal enemies. Iron weapons clashed, shields splintered, javelins flew, and cavalry charges thundered across the open fields. Both sides understood they were fighting not simply for land, but for an era. Ancient sources describe chaotic confusion. Former subject tribes knew Hun tactics intimately. They anticipated cavalry strikes, feigned retreats, and arrow waves. The Huns attempted their classic maneuver of shooting arrows while riding at full speed, but Ardaric prepared countermeasures. He used dense infantry formations to absorb cavalry waves and then used spearmen to break momentum. Elik fought fiercely. Chroniclers say he led charges personally, wielding weapons with tremendous power, perhaps trying to embody his father's spirit. But bravery could not replace numerical disadvantage. Slowly, the coalition army overwhelmed Hun cavalry. The battle broke into scattered fights across hills and valleys. Then tragedy unfolded. Elik was killed. His death shattered remaining Hun morale. When the eldest son died, symbolic kingship died with him. Warriors who had sworn loyalty to Attila's blood saw his line broken and fled. The Battle of Nideo ended with devastating consequences. Huns were scattered. Confederation collapsed. Germany and Hungary changed forever. Ardaric's Gepids seized control of large territories, including parts of the Hungarian plain that once held Attila's headquarters. Other former allies claimed lands as well. The Ostrogoths, no longer chained to Hun rule, began migrating toward Italy, eventually establishing a kingdom in the remnants of the Western Roman Empire. The Huns, reduced to small tribal fragments, retreated eastward. Some settled near the Black Sea. Others merged with Turkic and Bulgar populations. Their identity faded into the complex ethnic mosaic of Eurasian nomads. Though some Hun bands continued raiding Roman territory into the 460s, they no longer posed imperial-level danger. Yet psychological echo remained. Generations across Europe told stories about the Huns, their speed, brutality, fearlessness, and mysterious culture. Songs and legends described them as demons on horseback. Churches preserved prayers asking protection from returning Huns even after the empire was gone. In this way, Attila's legacy lived longer than the empire he had built. Perhaps the most striking element of Nideo is the irony. Attila conquered vast lands that no Roman emperor ever could, yet his empire lasted barely a decade after his death. The reason is clear. Attila ruled through personal authority. not structured statecraft. Without Attila, the Huns were just another steppe tribe among many. This collapse also reshaped the political landscape of Europe. Before Nideo, the Huns were the gravitational center of European politics. After Nideo, new powers emerged: the Goths, Franks, Burgundians, and Lombards. The vacuum left by the Huns helped create medieval Europe. And in Rome, leaders celebrated what they believed was divine justice. But fate remained cruelly ironic. Just 22 years after Attila's death, Rome itself would fall to another barbarian leader, Odoacer, who overthrew the last Roman emperor in 476 CE. Rome outlived Attila, but not by much. The final transformation of the Hun Empire, and the legacy it left behind, reveals the difference between transient conquest and lasting civilization. Attila's empire, built on rapid expansion and charismatic terror, turned out to be short-lived because it lacked administrative infrastructure. This truth raises an important historical question. Was the Hun Empire ever truly an empire in the Roman sense, or was it a temporary alliance of warlike nations united by external pressure? Evidence suggests the latter. The Huns operated through personal loyalty rather than centralized bureaucracy. Their law was unwritten. Their treasury depended on tribute and war spoils rather than taxation. Their communication network functioned through oral memory and mounted couriers. Their military might relied on continuous victory to maintain morale. When victory stopped, support eroded. Attila understood this reality, even if his successors did not. His empire survived because he constantly provided direction, reward, and intimidation. Under Elik, Dingizic, and Ernak, none of those factors remained. Literally within months after Attila's burial, the empire disassembled into competing fragments. Rome watched this disintegration cautiously. Diplomats described tribal congresses where survivors argued about leadership and territory. Letters from the Eastern Empire revealed satisfaction that tribute payments had ended forever. Writers celebrated Marcian for refusing gold to Attila earlier. The West continued to interpret the collapse as divine salvation. But historians now see deeper meaning. The destruction of the Huns rearranged European power distribution in significant ways. Keycap I Ostrogoths regained freedom. Their liberation from Hun control allowed them to march into Italy decades later. Under Theodoric the Great, they built a kingdom that blended Roman administration with Gothic authority. Keycap II Gepids gained territorial power. Ardaric became a major king in Central Europe, reshaping trade routes and border dynamics. Keycap III Romans lost dangerous allies. Ironically, Rome's temporary safety meant long-term weakness. Without the Huns to counterbalance other tribes, Rome became vulnerable to new enemies. Keycap IV steppe identity transformed. Hun remnants merged with Turkic and Bulgar tribes, contributing to future nomadic cultures that would later threaten Byzantium. Most ancient civilizations separated religion into temples, priests, and scripture. The Huns placed religion everywhere, integrated into every breath. Central to Hun spirituality was the belief that life was a journey without end, cycling through seasons, migrations, births, and deaths. The Huns experienced constant movement. They did not build stone cities where time felt anchored. They tracked existence by migration cycles, from summer grasslands to winter shelter zones. Their worldview saw movement as sacred. The soul traveled just as the body did. This mobility created identity built on resilience. If hardship came, the spirit adapted. If drought came, faith demanded relocation, not despair. This explains why Hun armies did not lose morale during long treks across barren lands. They believed life meant struggle, and struggle meant growth. Hun cosmology included three realms: The upper realm, sky gods, stars, ancestors. The middle realm, earth humans, animals, and nature. The lower realm, spirit world shadows, curses, ghosts. Shamans moved between realms through trance. Death rituals prepared souls for transition. Attila's death exemplifies worldview. Unlike Roman emperors buried for political glory, Attila was buried for spiritual secrecy. His grave hidden so no enemy or spirit could dishonor him. His burial preserved cosmic balance. The Huns believed spirits lived in rivers, mountains, forests, and storms. Natural features possessed personality. Rivers carried dreams. Mountains held ancient wisdom. Wind whispered ancestral advice. Warriors listened. One of the most interesting unanswered questions is whether the Huns practiced totemic reincarnation beliefs. Some evidence suggests families associated with wolf imagery believed their ancestors were reborn within their bloodline, carrying courage through generations. Hun shamans likely served as healers. Traditional herbal medicines treated wounds and illness. Keycap 5 psychological legacy endured. Europe never forgot the terror of Hun cavalry. Later medieval armies studied Hun tactics, especially the combination of mobility, archery, and ambush warfare. Even modern military historians still analyze Hun psychology. How fear, unpredictability, and speed could defeat armies more effectively than brute strength. Another enduring legacy lies in myth-making. For centuries, Attila became legendary across cultures. In Norse sagas, he appears as Atli, a tragic hero. In German epic poetry, he transforms into Etzel in the Nibelungenlied. In Christian writings, he becomes God's punishment. In Hungarian folklore, he is remembered as an ancestral father. These radically different portrayals reveal how Attila transcended historical identity and entered cultural imagination. He became a mirror reflecting each society's beliefs. As for the Huns themselves, their disappearance remains historically mysterious. Archaeologists struggle to trace their graves and settlements. Their language left almost no written record. Their royal tombs, including Attila's supposed triple-layered burial, are lost. The collapse of the Hun Empire proved irreversible. By the late 460s, their political presence had vanished. Dingizic, attempting to revive Hun power, was captured and executed by the Eastern Romans in 469 CE. His head was displayed as a trophy, symbolizing the final end of Hun political identity. Ernak led small groups eastward, possibly forming new tribes that centuries later contributed to Bulgar statehood. But the empire as the world had known it under Attila was gone. History thus teaches that the Hun Empire was both unstoppable and fragile. Unstoppable while led by one extraordinary man. Fragile because its strength depended entirely on him. It died because Attila died, but its shadow outlived Rome. For as long as European history is studied, Attila's story will echo, a reminder that empires built on terror burn brightly, then burn out, but their fire reshapes the world they leave behind. After the collapse of the Hun Empire and the fragmentation of Attila's confederation, Europe entered a period where memory replaced direct experience. Across the continent, Attila's legacy transformed from living terror into cultural legend. This transformation reveals how societies remember conquerors not simply as historical figures, but as symbols that shape identity for centuries. In the decades immediately following Attila's death, Roman leaders continued to speak about him with fear. Across Italy and Gaul, priests referred to him in sermons long after he was gone. His name became shorthand for destruction. Yet this fear gradually evolved into something deeper, fascination. People who never saw the Huns still told stories about them, using the narrative not only to describe the past, but to explain the present. Roman chroniclers who survived the invasion wrote about Attila with a blend of admiration and revulsion. They emphasized his intelligence, self-control, and strategic brilliance, while condemning his violence, raids, and barbarian culture. Priscus, the Roman envoy who had spoken to Attila, wrote descriptions that were neither hateful nor flattering, but detailed and observational. These writings helped future ages understand Attila as more than just a destroyer. They revealed him as a man capable of diplomacy, mercy, and negotiation. Through Priscus, historians learned that Attila could speak calmly with ambassadors, laugh at jokes, and follow etiquette. Such portrayals complicated the simplistic picture of him as a monster. Yet the greatest cultural transformation occurred among Germanic peoples. Tribes once crushed by Attila later inherited his mythos. In Germanic oral tradition, he became Etzel, a king woven into the grand epic literature of medieval Europe. Works such as the Nibelungenlied, one of the most important heroic epics of the Middle Ages, transformed Attila from historical scourge into a romanticized monarch. In this text, Etzel is not a demon king. He is patient, generous, and powerful. The Huns in the Nibelungenlied live in a grand court full of feasts, knights, queens, and halls built like medieval castles. The real Hun nomad culture vanished, replaced by a medieval Germanic imagination of kingship. This rewriting reveals how memory morphs according to cultural needs. Furthermore, the Norse sagas absorbed Attila into Scandinavian mythology. Under the name Attila, he appears as a tragic warlord who becomes embroiled in betrayals and blood vengeance. In the Volsunga saga, Attila marries Gudrun, but their union ends in murder, revenge, and tragedy. In these stories, he symbolizes human ambition and downfall, not simply destruction. Norse poets shaped Attila into a dramatic character fitting their worldview of glorious doom. In Hungary, the legend moved in the opposite direction. Attila became a founding father figure. Medieval Hungarians believed they descended from Huns, while modern genetics and archaeology show no direct biological connection. The cultural identity was powerful. Hungarian rulers claimed lineage from Attila to strengthen legitimacy. Chronicles written in the medieval kingdom of Hungary asserted that the Magyars, who migrated to the Carpathian Basin in the 9th century, were heirs to Hun power. Even today, many Hungarian place names, monuments, and cultural references preserve Attila's memory. Christianity also shaped legacy. Priests described Attila as the Scourge of God, a phrase meaning divine punishment against Roman sin. Even people who hated Attila repeated his legend because it gave them a theological narrative explaining why Rome fell in a crisis. The idea that God used Attila as a tool of justice inspired fear and awe. Later, medieval historians expanded this idea, turning Attila into a cosmic instrument of prophecy. Some even believed he was a sign of the approaching apocalypse. Attila also influenced European language. His name became synonymous with brutality. Military leaders who caused large-scale devastation were compared to him. Medieval chronicles described firestorms as Hunnic winds. Chroniclers referred to raiders as Huns, even if they were not ethnically Hun at all, proving the name had evolved from identity to category. In this way, Attila remained alive, not physically, but symbolically. Even after his empire vanished, he stood on the mental landscape of Europe as a permanent reminder that civilization was fragile and that history could turn violently in a single generation. The shaping of Attila's memory was not uniform across Europe. Each cultural region reinterpreted his life according to its needs and perspectives. In Western Europe, especially France and Germany, Attila symbolized an enemy that tested Christian civilization. In these regions, medieval historians wrote about Attila using language that blended horror with reluctant admiration. They described him as a king who possessed supernatural charisma, able to bend warriors to his will. They emphasized his tactical brilliance, noting he used deception, mobility, and psychological warfare better than any Roman commander. Yet they also emphasized that Christian providence ultimately protected the West at the Battle of Chalons. This narrative allowed medieval societies to claim moral superiority without denying military weakness. The idea that spiritual righteousness triumphed over physical might became an important cultural function of Attila's memory. Priests reminded congregations that Rome nearly fell because of arrogance, moral decay, and sin. Only faith saved them. In this interpretation, Attila did not represent evil, but divine warning. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Roman Empire, Attila's memory acquired another tone entirely. Byzantine authors remembered Attila not as a demonic invader, but as a shrewd diplomat. Constantinople had negotiated successfully with the Huns for years, sometimes winning concessions, sometimes losing. Eastern accounts described Attila as disciplined and politically intelligent, unlike many Germanic kings who appeared reckless and unstable. The Eastern Empire also emphasized that it survived Attila without divine miracles, relying instead on negotiation, economic stability, and strategic military pressure along the Danube. This contrast between Western fear and Eastern pragmatism shows how history mutates, depending on perspective. Later Islamic historians in Central Asia and Persia had yet another view. They admired Attila as an archetypal steppe conqueror, comparing him to figures like Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. In Islamic chronicles, Attila became part of a continuous nomadic tradition, one defined by cavalry, mobility, and empire building. Although Islam did not exist during Attila's lifetime, later Muslim scribes integrated him into a world history narrative where steppe warriors repeatedly challenged old states and reshaped religion, culture, and empire lines. In Russia and Eastern Europe, Attila's name blended into folklore about giants, spirits, and lost kings. Russian legends sometimes portrayed him as a supernatural force controlling the winds and storms. Steppe mythology treated him almost as a semi-divine ancestor whose spirit wandered the great plains after death. Even if these tales lack historical fact, they reveal emotional truth. Attila's memory resonated because he embodied themes that stretched beyond politics, themes of destiny, conquest, and transformation. Meanwhile, in the academic world, his legacy underwent modern reinterpretation beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly with a rise of nationalism. European historians, shaped by identity politics, debated whether the Huns were ancestors of Hungarians, Turks, Mongols, or other steppe peoples. These debates reflected not archaeological certainty, but national pride. Groups wanted to claim Attila as their own hero or distance themselves from him entirely. Modern archaeology, however, complicated these narratives. Excavations of Hun graves in Hungary and Romania revealed material culture blending Iranian, Germanic, and Central Asian influences rather than a single ethnicity. Attila's empire was not a monocultural entity. It was a mosaic of identities pulled together through leadership. The physical remnants, horse equipment, bows, pottery, show that steppe life was adaptable, borrowing techniques from across thousands of miles. This archaeological evidence highlighted something important. Attila's strength came from flexibility, not rigid structure. He built networks rather than forcing assimilation. His unique coalition strategy allowed multiple cultures to coexist under a shared military purpose. In the 20th century, Attila's legacy shifted again through popular culture. Movies portrayed him as a barbarian king covered in fur and roaring on horseback, a wild force rather than a strategic ruler. Historians criticize these depictions for ignoring intelligence. Attila was not a brute. He was a man who negotiated treaties, manipulated economies, and treated diplomacy like warfare. Yet stereotypes persist. Even today, calling someone Attila implies ruthless aggression. Sports teams use the name to evoke fear. Writers describe hurricanes and warfare using Hun analogies. The cultural footprint is immense. Attila's memory lives because he represents the collision between nomad and empire, chaos and order, fear and admiration. The cultural echo of Attila extends into modern identity, politics, and psychology. One of the most significant areas of influence is national mythology. Hungary, as mentioned earlier, built identity around the myth of Hun ancestry. In Hungarian literature from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, kings claimed descent from Attila to legitimize their sovereignty. Even though modern historians reject literal ancestry, the idea shaped symbols, names, and cultural pride. Monuments, statues, streets, and even children carry the name Attila in Hungary today. This phenomenon demonstrates how myth can shape reality long after historical fact fades. The memory of Attila gave Hungarian national consciousness a heroic past. It also provided a narrative of ancient greatness, a psychological armor during centuries of conflict with larger European empires. Similarly, Scandinavia used Attila to strengthen sagas. In the poetic Edda and the Volsunga saga, Atli stands as a tragic ruler entangled in betrayal. These stories contributed to medieval court culture, inspiring music, poetry, and drama. Later, in the 19th century, Romantic writers used Attila to explore themes of destiny and doom. Their creative works fed into opera and classical music, just as Richard Wagner drew on Germanic legends that included the figure of Etzel. Christian Europe continued to use Attila as metaphor throughout the Middle Ages. When Mongols arrived in the 13th century, terrified Europeans called them Huns returned from hell, showing how the identity of Attila transcended biology and became a cultural category. Generations later, during World War I, British propaganda referred to Germans as Huns, using the name as a slur meaning savage invader. Ironically, the actual Huns bore almost no resemblance to modern Germans, but Attila's terror symbolism made the insult powerful. Meanwhile, modern scholarship re-evaluates Attila through anthropology and economics. Researchers now argue that Attila was not merely destructive. His empire facilitated trade across Eurasia, moving goods between Europe and Central Asia. Roman gold flowed into Central Asia through Hun networks, enriching populations that had previously lived on the periphery of civilization. This circulation would eventually shape Silk Road commerce. Attila also influenced military theory. The combination of horse archery, speed, and psychological warfare became key strategic models for later steppe empires. Mongols under Genghis Khan used similar methods, and Ottoman cavalry learned from earlier nomadic traditions that began in part with the Huns. Politically, Attila revealed how fragile empires are when dependent on tribute. Rome's desperation to avoid war by sending gold encouraged a system of economic blackmail. This model would recur throughout history. Vikings demanded tribute from Anglo-Saxon kings. Early medieval warlords demanded payments from rural communities. The Huns helped invent a political economy of intimidation. Attila also influenced modern storytelling. Writers throughout the centuries used him to embody extremes of masculinity: unstoppable warrior, ruthless conqueror, prophetic leader. Yet some modern authors depict him as misunderstood, a victim of Roman propaganda, a leader defending his people against imperial oppression. This revision mirrors broader historical trends. rulers once painted as villains often receive reinterpretation as cultural understanding evolves. Psychologically, Attila symbolizes the fear of the outsider. When societies feel threatened by immigration, foreign powers, or cultural change, they resurrect Attila as metaphor. For instance, 20th century fears about Soviet expansion sometimes invoked Hun imagery. In academic writing, the term Hunnic storm described sudden invasion forces. Yet Attila's memory also teaches humility. His empire's fall proves that no conqueror can escape mortality or time. For all his victories, Attila died quietly. His soldiers scattered. His empire vanished. His people dissolved into other cultures. What remained was story, myth larger than truth. Today, Attila stands not only as a historical king, but as legend unbound by a single identity. Romans saw him as destroyer. Scandinavians saw him as hero. Hungarians saw him as ancestor. Christians saw him as punishment. Modern scholars see him as a complex leader navigating tribal politics and imperial pressure. In every form, the memory of Attila reveals more about those who remembered him than about Attila himself. That is the final irony. The most feared man in Europe became a mirror in which civilizations reflected their own fears, hopes, beliefs, and storytelling traditions. To understand the full importance of Attila's empire, one must recognize how the Huns transformed the very structure of late antiquity. Before the arrival of the Huns in the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome believed it still commanded the destiny of Europe. Despite internal political crises and economic strain, the empire relied on systems that had functioned for centuries. Taxation feeding armies, bureaucracy managing land distribution, and diplomacy maintaining borders. Yet, when the Huns appeared, the Romans faced something entirely unfamiliar. An enemy unlike Germanic tribes, unlike Persians, and unlike internal rebellions. The Huns brought a new style of warfare, new cultural pressures, and a new psychological dimension that changed how Rome understood power. Before the Huns, most barbarian migrations into Roman territory occurred gradually. Groups like the Franks, Vandals, and Visigoths pushed westward over decades. They negotiated settlements, served in Roman armies, and formed treaties. But the Huns erupted into Europe with sudden speed and overwhelming force. They struck the Gothic kingdoms north of the Danube with such ferocity that entire populations fled toward Roman borders. This triggered the cascade of migrations that reshaped the Roman world. One of the most consequential events directly tied to the Huns was the uprising of the Visigoths in 376 to 378 CE. Driven westward by Hun pressure, the Tervingi Goths pleaded for sanctuary within the Roman frontier. Roman officials mishandled their settlement, leading to famine, exploitation, and resentment. This mistreatment ignited the Gothic revolt that culminated in the disastrous Battle of Adrianople, where Emperor Valens was killed and 2/3 of his army were annihilated. Rome never recovered militarily from Adrianople. The battle marked a turning point after which barbarian federates became indispensable to Roman defense. Without Hun pressure, this chain reaction might not have begun. Over the next decades, the Huns continued pushing waves of peoples toward Rome. Alans, Suebi, Vandals, and Burgundians migrated westward. These groups disrupted provincial economies, ravaged farmland, and spread instability deep into Roman territory. The fact that the Huns did not always conquer regions directly does not diminish their impact. The threat they posed reshaped Roman political strategy. Rome began offering lands to barbarian groups as foederati simply to maintain a defensive buffer. Entire Roman provinces were depopulated during this period. The Danube frontier, once dotted with prosperous agricultural estates, fell into ruin. Birch bark, pine resin, and mare's milk served medicinal functions. Healing rituals combined chants, herbs, and pressure points. Another overlooked aspect, mental health. Hun spirituality acknowledged fear, grief, and stress through communal ritual. Funeral wailing allowed emotional release. Song allowed catharsis. Steppe cultures did not suppress emotion, they performed it. Hun funerals often lasted days. Warriors told stories about the deceased, reaffirming identity and memory. Such ceremonies strengthened community bonds and eased trauma from constant warfare. Religion also shaped Hun diplomacy. They believed breaking sacred oaths invited spiritual disaster, which made their diplomatic promises surprisingly reliable. Rome often broke agreements because emperors changed. The Huns treated their agreements as sacred contracts signed before gods. Hun religion valued honor above life. A man dying bravely achieved spiritual immortality. A coward lost his name. This ideology explains their ferocity in battle and their patience in negotiation. The steppe warrior entered battle with calm acceptance. Fear of death vanished when the afterlife promised peace. Hun rulers served as spiritual symbols. Attila especially was seen as bridge between earth and sky. His presence shaped political unity. When he died, spiritual order fractured. Even landscape archaeology shows religion embedded everywhere. Burial sites lie near rivers to symbolize life flow. Camps arranged around central fires symbolized cosmic circles. Roads between settlements followed natural shapes of land, demonstrating respect rather than domination. Hun religion also reshaped European imagination. For centuries, Christian Europe condemned shamanism as demonic. Medieval writers painted the Huns as devil worshippers, not because of evidence, but because their rituals frightened sedentary societies. Archaeological data reveals abandoned villas, burned villages, and destroyed fortifications. Roman taxation failed as people fled or died. Gold shipments to the military decreased. With weakened finances, the empire struggled to maintain roads, port defenses, granaries, and manufacturing. The economy shrank. Politically, the Huns forced Rome to restructure diplomacy. Before Attila, the empire maintained superiority in negotiations by offering patronage or manipulation. But Attila demanded Rome treat him as a geopolitical equal. His ambassadors insisted on scheduled payments, border recognition, and direct negotiation with emperors, not governors. Rome could bully Germanic kings, but it could not bully the Huns. The tribute system, millions of solidi in gold, became the backbone of imperial expense management. This reliance on tribute drained Rome's economy and its pride. Eastern emperors complained openly that gold once spent on infrastructure was now shipped to Attila. These payments weakened internal morale. Senators asked, if Rome must pay the barbarians to leave us in peace, what does the empire stand for? At the same time, Hunnic involvement deepened Roman political corruption. Roman generals paid Attila to attack their political rivals. Byzantine ministers bribed Hun envoys to influence succession disputes. Roman aristocrats hired Hun mercenaries as if they were a private army. Such entanglements blurred borders between friend and foe, reshaping the meaning of Roman citizenship and military loyalty. The impact on Roman military structure was profound. After repeated defeats, Rome began recruiting heavily from Germanic tribes. The Western Roman army by Attila's era was less Roman and more a mixture of Goths, Huns, Franks, Alans, and Burgundians. Traditional legionary formations disappeared. New composite units formed around mounted archery and flexible cavalry. Roman armor even changed shape. Lighter gear developed to match Hun tactics. Rome was no longer shaping the world. The world was reshaping Rome. Thus, The Huns acted as a cultural earthquake, the shock that shattered the foundations of late antiquity and accelerated Rome's collapse toward medieval transformation. While the Huns are often described solely as destroyers, a deeper examination reveals they also facilitated cultural exchange and integration across regions that had previously been isolated. Nomadic networks connected Europe to Central Asia in new ways. Trade routes linking Persia, China, the Steppe, and Europe became more vibrant because the Huns served as guardians and sometimes aggressors along these economic highways. Hun commerce moved more than just material goods. It transported languages, technologies, belief systems, and ideas. One of the most important contributions was the spread of composite biotechnology deeper into Europe. Until the Huns appeared, Roman armies relied mainly on infantry-based combat and short-range archers. The Hun bow, however, was revolutionary, able to fire with remarkable force at deadly distance. The Romans studied this weapon and eventually modified their cavalry to adopt similar equipment. Additionally, the Huns influenced European horsemanship. Saddle design changed. Stirrups would eventually spread westward, altering warfare dramatically. While stirrups did not fully arrive in Europe until after the Huns, the steppe culture that the Huns embodied prepared the continent for a future where armored cavalry dominated battlefield strategy. Cultural exchange went beyond war. Clothing styles shifted. Archaeologists find Hun-style belt buckles and ornaments across the Balkans, France, Hungary, and Italy. Burial sites demonstrate fusion identities, Hun material alongside Germanic artifacts. These graves show intermarriage between tribal elites. When the Ostrogoths became Hun allies, their warriors learned composite bow training, horseback maneuvering, and steppe customs. Religion transformed as well. Steppe shamanistic beliefs entered Europe indirectly, altering how many Germanic tribes viewed dreams, symbols, and omens. Spiritual rituals connected to ancestors gained new prominence. Roman writers documented Hun priests reading animal bones for prophecy, practices later mirrored by Germanic seers. Rome itself adapted. Court culture increasingly featured foreign clothing and hairstyles. Jewelry that once appeared exotic began showing up in Roman aristocratic graves. The empire was becoming cosmopolitan under stress. Hun diplomacy reshaped Roman language usage. The requirement to negotiate with non-Roman leaders forced Rome to maintain interpreters skilled in Gothic, Latin, Greek, and Turkic languages. This multilingual diplomatic environment affected intellectual history. Roman writers learned more about distant peoples. Ethnographies developed. Maps expanded. Even though Romans wrote with prejudice, they gained knowledge through interaction. Ironically, the Huns also influenced Christianity. Many barbarian federates living under Hun rule were Christian, including large groups of Goths. These tribes preserved scripture during migration. When they resettled Western lands, they brought religious knowledge with them. In this way, the Huns indirectly protected Christian populations by absorbing them into their empire and moving them westward where Christianity spread further. On the psychological front, the Huns forced Rome to confront the reality that empire was not inevitable. For centuries, Roman writers claimed their dominance would last forever. They believed barbarians were destined to fail. But the Huns proved that external pressure could shatter a world order. This realization motivated new theological thinking. Augustinian philosophy about the fall of earthly kingdoms emerged during the 5th century partly because Rome was collapsing under barbarian pressures, including the Huns. Many scholars argue that without Attila, Rome might have continued slowly declining for centuries. Instead, the Hun invasions accelerated the timeline. Within 25 years of Attila's death, the Western Roman Empire fell. This collapse was not caused by Attila alone, but he delivered decisive blows by removing manpower, territory, and economic confidence. When Germanic tribes filled Hun power vacuums, Europe transitioned from imperial rule to medieval kingdoms. Thus, the Huns did not merely destroy. They reshaped, connected, accelerated, and transformed Europe. The transformation of Europe after the fall of the Huns reveals the final dimension of Attila's historical impact. He changed not only Rome, but the identity of entire peoples who emerged in the post-Hunnic world. Many Germanic tribes that had once served under Attila later became builders of medieval civilization. Without the Huns, their migrations might have taken different paths, or not occurred at all. Take the Ostrogoths. Under Attila, they lived as semi-independent allies, learning steppe warfare and political organization. After Nideo, they moved into Italy under Theodoric the Great and founded a kingdom that preserved Roman law, repaired aqueducts, supported libraries, and restored grain distribution networks. Their rule delayed total collapse in Italy for decades. Without the Huns pushing them west, this cultural synthesis may never have occurred. The Visigoths, who had once allied with Rome against Attila, later conquered Iberia and formed the Visigothic Kingdom of Spain. Their legal codes influenced later Spanish law. Their councils shaped early European Christianity. Without the Hun pressure that drove their ancestors into the empire, their history would have been entirely different. The Franks, too, emerged from the ashes of Rome. As Hun power disappeared, Frankish kings expanded their territory across Gaul, eventually founding what would become France. Clovis, the first Christian Frankish king, united territories that once belonged to the Western Empire, adopting Roman institutions and laws. Again, Hun displacement contributed to the opportunity. The Lombards, another tribe shaped by steppe interaction, migrated into Italy after the Ostrogoths weakened. Their long-term rule in the peninsula laid the foundation for future Italian political structure. Their aristocracy mixed Germanic and Roman customs that later influenced medieval kingship. The very concept of medieval Europe came from these power transfers, Roman administrative systems combining with Germanic leadership models. The Huns were one of the central catalysts creating this new world. On a cultural level, written memory immortalized Attila's significance. Medieval scribes recorded him not because they admired him, but because they needed him to explain their own origins. European societies love legends of transformation. Greek epics have the Trojan War. The Middle Ages had Attila. Even the idea of Europe as a continent defined against the East gained strength through Hun invasion narratives. Romans began labeling peoples beyond the Danube as other, forming the mental boundary separating Europe from Asian identity. These categories survive even today despite their imprecision. Moreover, modern nationalism owes certain psychological roots to the Hunnic migrations. The merging of tribes under new identities, the adaptation of Roman law into Germanic structures, and the mythic remembrance of shared threats helped shape collective identities like French, Italian, and Spanish. From the perspective of world history, the Huns serve as an example of how nomadic forces trigger structural change. Similar processes occurred later with the Mongols, another steppe empire whose military impact restructured civilizations from Russia to China. Historians also credit the Huns with altering medieval warfare permanently. The age of infantry supremacy ended. Cavalry, once supplementary, became dominant. Later medieval knights owed their battlefield culture to innovations pioneered by Hun and steppe armies centuries earlier. Meanwhile, Rome's psychological defeat changed Western self-perception forever. No longer immortal, no longer invincible, Rome became one empire among many, vulnerable to forces beyond its borders. The intellectual humility, the This produced changed Western philosophy. Thus, Attila stands as a hinge point in human history. Before him, ancient Rome ruled. After him, medieval Europe rose. The collapse of one world opened the doorway to another. Attila may have died suddenly. His empire may have shattered, but the movement he unleashed echoed across continents and centuries. He shaped kingdoms he never saw, influenced religions he never practiced, and powered cultural systems that would define Europe for 1,000 years. In this sense, the Huns did not vanish. They dissolved into the bloodstream of Europe. Their empire ended, but their impact continues every time Western civilization examines its own origins. To understand why the Huns reshaped Europe, it is crucial to explore their military system not only as a brutal force, but as a highly engineered war machine. Too often, old textbooks describe the Huns as chaotic raiders lacking discipline, but modern research exposes a powerful truth. The Huns were one of the most organized, efficient, and strategically sophisticated cavalry armies in ancient history. Their success was not accidental. It was engineered through lifestyle training, culture, adaptability, and innovation that gave them advantages even over the Romans, who for centuries believed they had perfected the art of war. The foundation of Hun military strength began in childhood. Boys learned to ride before they could walk confidently. Steppe culture placed infants on horseback early, so their muscles and balance adapted naturally. To them, a horse was not an animal. It was an extension of the body. Riding was not instruction. It was instinct. Their entire lives unfolded on horseback. They ate, played, hunted, traveled, and even slept while leaning against saddles. It is no exaggeration to say that every Hun male possessed more mounted hours by adolescence than most Roman cavalrymen gained in an entire career. This constant riding shaped their warfare style. Most forces in Europe fought as infantry. Rigid shields, spear formations, slow maneuvering, and disciplined blocks controlled by shouted orders. The Huns fought with speed, freedom, and fluidity. They used open terrain like water uses a riverbed, flowing around enemy formations, surrounding, cutting, and striking at weak points. They never locked themselves into defensive lines. Their strategy resembled modern guerrilla warfare, combined with heavy strike cavalry. The composite bow, crafted from horn, wood, sinew, and glue, served as the Hun signature weapon. This bow produced tremendous kinetic energy at distance. It could puncture Roman armor at over 150 yards. Roman infantry, trained to endure short-range arrow assaults from Germanic tribes, found Hun volleys terrifying. Arrows rained down before their formations could close distance. Worse, the Huns could shoot in any direction, even backwards while riding at full gallop. Hunnic arrows often had bone or iron tips, and some evidence suggests whistling arrowheads used to produce psychological terror. When volleys filled the sky, defenders described it as darkening the sun. The rapid release technique gave the Huns an almost machine gun effect. Each warrior could fire multiple arrows per minute while moving, whereas Roman archers required stationary positions. But bows alone did not make the Huns invincible. Their armored cavalry functioned like shock troops. After archers weakened enemy lines, heavy horsemen charged with spears and swords. Their saddles had high frames that locked warriors in place, allowing them to deliver devastating force during impact, a war doctrine Europeans would later use for medieval knights. Hun horses, smaller than Roman breeds, were tougher and needed less food. They could gallop across harsh terrain, survive winter on low-nutrient grass, and drink icy water without injury. This biological advantage meant the Huns could campaign year-round instead of seasonally like the Romans. Discipline, contrary to stereotype, was extreme. Hun camps followed strict order. Warrior ranks were organized by kinship groups and military units. Commanders enforced silence during movement to avoid detection. They used horn calls, whistle patterns, and smoke signals to direct units during battle. Roman military leaders admitted openly that Huns communicated faster and more clearly than their own troops. Psychological warfare was another weapon. The Huns deliberately looked terrifying to strike fear before combat. Their clothing, hairstyles, and scarification were designed to intimidate. Many had elongated skulls shaped since infancy, a sign of status and unity. For Romans, these appearances resembled demons from nightmares. The Huns rarely fought prolonged sieges. They excelled in open conflict, but under Attila, they evolved rapidly. They hired Roman and Germanic engineers to build siege towers, battering rams, ladders, and trenches. Their attack on fortified cities like Nisus, Aquileia, and Sirmium proved they could dismantle stone defenses through engineering and persistence. Their war ethics also differed from Roman norms. While Romans valued pitched battles and territorial control, the Huns valued mobility, economic advantage, and survival. They used raids strategically to sap morale, weaken supply lines, and isolate enemies. They targeted livestock first, understanding that hunger kills faster than swords. The Hun military system formed its power not from technology alone, but from synergy, life on horseback, institutional courage, natural environment adaptation, and leadership charisma. This combination allowed relatively small numbers to defeat armies 3 times larger. Thus, the Hun military machine was not barbaric chaos. It was a masterpiece of efficiency crafted through centuries of cultural evolution. Another reason the Huns dominated Europe was their unique military command structure. Roman armies relied on hierarchy, paperwork, and written logistics. The Huns relied on personal loyalty, mobility, and rapid decision-making. Their system did not need bureaucracy. It needed unity through will. Authority flowed through Attila and elite tribal leaders. But unlike Rome, with rigid chains of command, the Huns built leadership flexibility. Commanders led units because their warriors trusted their judgment, not simply because they held hereditary rank. Decision-making speed defined survival. If a battlefield changed, Hun generals adjusted instantly without waiting for written orders. Rome often lost battles because commanders refused to disobey outdated instructions. The Huns thrived because initiative was rewarded. Leadership also extended to diplomacy. Before war began, Huns collected intelligence from refugees, merchants, deserters, and scouts. They learned every detail: enemy troop numbers, political weakness, supply stores, personal rivalries, religious tensions, and settlement locations. No Roman general used espionage as aggressively. Attila himself retained a vast network of ambassadors, interpreters, and informants. These men traveled through Constantinople, Ravenna, Gaul, and feudal enclaves gathering secrets disguised as trade talk. Rome never understood how much Attila knew about them. Huns also mastered asymmetric warfare. They did not simply charge in straight lines. They surrounded armies, blocked rivers, controlled mountain passes, and starved cities. They waged winter campaigns when Roman forces retreated to quarters. They fought at night. They fought in marshes. They fought across broken terrain unimaginable to Roman cavalry. During raids, Hun units used a classic 4-wave attack system. 1 scout wave, small riders probe defenses, testing enemy response speed. 2 arrow wave, mounted archers shower volleys, destroying shield lines. 3 ambush wave, fast riders hit flanks, isolating units. 4 heavy cavalry wave. Once formation cracked, elite warriors charged and ended resistance. Roman commanders were stunned. Their greatest victories relied on shield walls staying intact. Once those cracked, the entire system disintegrated. The Huns even understood psychological time pressure. They moved so quickly that defenders rarely predicted arrival dates. If word said Attila was 3 days away, he could arrive the same morning. This speed shattered civilian morale. Hun cavalry also carried lassos. Yes, lassos, used to pull Roman soldiers off horses or drag infantry out of formation. These techniques horrified observers because they felt strange and humiliating. Yet, ironically, some Christian mystics later admired steppe spirituality because it preserved connection to nature and instinct. Hun belief systems illuminate their resilience. Their confidence in destiny commanded loyalty. Their courage came from cosmic assurance. Their unity came from spiritual worldview that placed the clan within the universe. They were not soulless destroyers. They were spiritual beings navigating an uncertain world with courage, meaning, and purpose. To understand how the Huns shaped European history, it is essential to examine their relationships with other barbarian tribes. The Huns did not exist in isolation. They interacted with dozens of nations across thousands of miles. Some tribes feared them, some served them, some learned from them, and some rose to power because of them. The story of the Huns is the story of interconnection, not isolation. Before Attila's reign, the arrival of the Huns in Europe during the late 4th century triggered a major domino effect. Their westward movement pushed Germanic tribes toward Roman borders, beginning the chain reaction that ultimately destroyed the Western Roman Empire. However, this migration was more than chaotic movement. It was strategic pressure. The Huns were not simply chasing tribes. They were absorbing them. When the Huns crossed the Volga and moved toward the Black Sea, they defeated the Alans, a powerful Iranian-speaking people, and partially absorbed them into their population. Many Alans later became Hun cavalry commanders. Some served as elite bodyguards to Attila. Their integration shows how the Huns built a multicultural empire. The next step was the Goths. The Visigoths and Ostrogoths lived north of the Danube and were among the most powerful tribes in Europe. The Huns crushed them so severely that the Goths begged Rome for sanctuary. This moment permanently reshaped Europe. Additionally, Hun warriors trained relentlessly. Hunting, racing, and mock combat kept reflexes sharp. Their skill in firing arrows behind them during retreat made them appear immortal. This tactic, called the Parthian shot, was perfected by Huns, not Parthians. All these advantages would fail if the Huns lacked internal unity. But Attila maintained cohesion through 3 core values. One shared plunder culture. Success fed reward, which fed loyalty. 2, mutual protection. Tribes survived because the empire stayed intact. 3, leader myth. Attila was not just king. He was destiny incarnate. This ideological binding made men fight to the death. Finally, the Huns used adaptability like a science. They learned languages from enemies. They copied Roman coin systems to manage payments. They borrowed armor types and improved them. They stole Roman siege ideas, then used them better. They absorbed Germanic infantry tactics. They turned defectors into officers. They never believed cultural pride meant refusing innovation. Rome failed here. Roman generals thought cavalry archers were dishonorable, chaotic, weak. They refused to learn from them and paid with defeat. The Hun military machine succeeded because it rejected static thinking. War, to Attila, was not ritual, it was evolution. The greatest misconceptions about Hun warfare involve the idea that they were merely destroyers. In reality, the Huns used war as controlled economics. They understood tribute was more profitable than conquest. Conquering territory cost resources. Forcing enemies to pay tribute produced wealth forever. That is why Attila negotiated with emperors constantly. His wars were calculated blows designed to pressure Rome into financial submission. Attila preferred threatening Rome rather than ruling it. Why? Because he knew empires collapse from cost, not force. A city burned once gives only rubble. A city spared becomes a paying client. The tribute system multiplied wealth at unimaginable speed. Eastern Rome sent thousands of pounds of gold each year. That gold funded more soldiers, more horses, more political leverage. Roman leaders, aware they could not defeat him militarily, tried to buy peace. But tribute dependence destroyed Roman self-confidence. Senators and generals hated sending gold to barbarians, yet they had no alternative. Economically, the Hun system changed market networks. Gold taken from Rome circulated through Germanic tribes, improving living standards across the steppe. This wealth financed new weaponry, increased trade, and strengthened vassal loyalty. Meanwhile, Rome lost the ability to pay its own troops properly. Soldiers deserted. Armies rebelled. The Huns indirectly collapsed Roman manpower. Another overlooked advantage: logistics. Historians used to believe the Huns lived entirely off local raiding. This is myth. Attila managed enormous supply networks of horse herds, livestock caravans, forage patterns, and winter migration routes. Each route was memorized, maintained, and guarded. They could move tens of thousands of people through Europe without starvation, something Rome could not do efficiently. Hun warfare also demonstrated strategic mercy. When tribes surrendered peacefully, the Huns protected them and sometimes integrated them as allies. Many groups voluntarily joined Attila because the benefits outweighed Roman oppression. The Huns also reshaped diplomacy into weaponry. Their negotiations used psychological staging. They kept foreign ambassadors waiting outside tents to assert dominance. They held feasts to show wealth and unity. They sat on raised platforms to create height intimidation. They made interpreters repeat messages multiple times to test emotional reaction. Even refusal became ritual. When Attila rejected an offer, he did so in front of crowds to project strength. Rome never adapted to these performative strategies. Roman diplomacy depended on rank and written protocol. The Huns depended on theater. The side using emotional pressure wins negotiations. Additionally, Hun warfare forced cultural integration. Tribes under their control lived together, traded languages, intermarried, and shared beliefs. The empire became a pan-Eurasian melting pot. Rome never achieved this level of cultural flexibility. It demanded assimilation, and when assimilation failed, rebellion erupted. The Huns instead built a multi-tribal war civilization, held together not by ethnicity, but purpose. Their strength came from diversity, an empire built from alliances rather than xenophobic exclusion. This explains why the Hun collapse unleashed chaos. After Attila vanished, old tribal identities resurfaced violently. But the legacy of Hun warfare is undeniable. They forced Rome into economic collapse. They reshaped military doctrine. They redefined cavalry power. They accelerated the transition from ancient to medieval world. Hun military success was not magic. It was science born from lived reality. Their foundation, mobility, psychology, adaptation, became guiding principles for warfare centuries later. Attila's army may have vanished, but its influence traveled down through Mongols, Magyars, Turks, Khazars, Cumans, and countless nomadic cultures that continued to redefine Eurasia. The Huns were not the end of a story. They were the beginning of a new world. To fully understand the Huns and their place in history, one must move beyond armies and invasions and explore their inner world. How they lived, what they valued, how they loved, how they raised children, how they worshipped, and how they structured their society. Too often, Popular history reduces the Huns to violent nomads without stability or culture, but archaeology and written testimony show otherwise. The Hun Empire was a living civilization built on traditions, social structure, aesthetics, economy, and memory. Hun villages and settlements were not chaotic camps scattered randomly across the plains. Even before they controlled half of Europe, the Huns possessed organized communities along river systems, fertile valleys, and seasonal grazing paths. Their dwellings were primarily yurts, circular tents made from layers of felt and wool stretched over wood frames. These structures provided insulation against bitter winters and ventilation during summers. Families decorated their yurts with patterns representing steppe symbolism, spirals, animal figures, and geometric knots. Scholars believe these designs were connected to spiritual stories, clan identity, and social status. Inside the yurt, life revolved around the hearth, literally and symbolically. Fire was sacred, providing warmth, protection, and cooked food. Families gathered around it each evening to discuss hunting plans, pass down legends, and negotiate marriage arrangements. Women controlled the domestic area, weaving textiles, preparing meals, and managing storage drawers built into the floor. Archaeological finds show Hun households owned bronze mirrors, combs, pottery, and imported Roman glass. They were far from primitive. Hun children grew up in a demanding environment shaped by nature and war. Boys learned horseback skills from age 3 or 4. They trained their own horses, practiced archery games, and competed in mock battles. Girls also learned to ride and contributed to herding animals. These children were not raised separately. They lived within adult society. They heard warriors discussing strategy and watched elders negotiate tribal affairs. Education came through immersion, not classroom schooling. Marriage customs among the Huns combined romance, alliances, and social advantage. Noble families often exchanged daughters to forge political unity. Marriage gifts included cattle, clothing, jewelry, and weapons. Hun women played significant social and economic roles. They influenced clan alliances, maintained property rights, and could initiate divorce under certain circumstances. Some women were honored as spiritual guides. However, Hun society was never static. It adapted to Rome, Persia, German tribes, and Central Asian influences. Clothing styles evolved. Archaeologists have found textile fragments suggesting colorful robes and trousers patterned with embroidery. Boots with turned-up tips, leather belts fitted with bronze buckles, and long coats lined with fur were common. Their clothing balanced practicality and beauty. Hun music and poetry also existed, though nearly all of it was oral. Warriors sang before battle, celebrating ancestors and victories. Funeral songs honored kings and heroes, echoing night after night across river valleys. While no written Hun music survives, Roman accounts mention drums, flutes, and string instruments used in ceremonies. Language remains the greatest mystery. Records mention Hun interpreters speaking multiple dialects. Linguists still debate whether their core language was Turkic, Mongolic, Yeniseian, or a steppe Creole. This multicultural confusion demonstrates how Hun identity formed not around language unity, but around shared lifestyle and loyalty. Their economy depended on livestock: sheep for clothing and food, cattle for wealth measurement, horses for military and travel, and goats for dairy. Hunting supplemented diet with wild animals such as elk, boar, and deer. Trade with Rome-added wine, grain, olive oil, and pottery. The Huns acted as middlemen moving goods along Eurasian trade routes. Spiritual belief shaped daily decisions. They honored sky gods, nature spirits, and ancestors. That is why thunder and lightning were interpreted as omens and why shamans guided rituals. Ritual sacrifices often involving horses, marked births, marriages, and political agreements. Thus, Hun daily life reveals a world rich with human complexity. They were not faceless raiders, but families, farmers, craftsmen, writers, and thinkers who built a civilization anchored by mobility, survival, adaptation, and pride. To understand Hun society further, we must explore their hierarchy, laws, justice practices, and leadership structures. Ancient writers sometimes claimed the Huns were anarchic, lacking formal government, but this was Roman misunderstanding. The Huns did not rely on written codes like Roman law. Instead, they functioned through customary systems enforced by clan elders and warrior councils. Their structure resembled early steppe confederations that valued cohesion through trust, history, and reputation instead of rigid bureaucracy. At the top of Hun's social organization stood the ruling family and tribal nobility. Before Attila, kingship was likely shared among powerful families. Leadership was chosen by merit, charisma, and clan influence, not only bloodline. The ruling elite oversaw diplomacy, war decisions, alliance negotiations, and wealth distribution. Beneath them existed warrior aristocracy, men who earned prestige through courage, loyalty, and success. Warrior families collected tribute, managed caravan routes, and served as local authority figures. One of the most important social values was loyalty to oath. When warriors pledged loyalty to a leader, betrayal was considered the greatest crime. Punishment for treason included death, exile, or ritual humiliation. Loyalty bonds functioned like glue, holding the empire together even without written legislation. At the village level, elders resolved disputes. They listened to arguments, consulted tradition, and issued judgments that balanced fairness and stability. Typical conflicts included marriage disagreements, livestock theft, land rights, and injury compensation. Punishments involved compensation payments or livestock exchange instead of long-term imprisonment. Mobility made prisons unnecessary. Hun law was not random. It was consistent with nomadic necessity. Sedentary codes rely on property lines and closed cities. Nomadic codes rely on reputation and balance. Gossip served as law enforcement because reputation determined one's future alliances. Hun society also valued generosity. Wealth distributed among followers earned loyalty. Hoarding wealth created resentment. Attila mastered generosity politics. He rewarded generals with treasure and horses, ensuring loyalty through prosperity. This same framework shaped community life. Families shared food during winter scarcity, ensuring group survival. Another overlooked aspect of Hun society was gender balance. Women were not silent background figures. They controlled domestic economy, weaving, food preservation, and camp logistics. Some traveled with war parties, managing horses and supplies. Others influenced political decisions. While patriarchy existed, it differed from Roman patriarchy. Hun women had more property control and public movement. Hun religion also influenced legal authority. Shamans interpreted dreams and omens to settle disputes. If a man claimed innocence, spiritual tests were sometimes used, similar to trial by ordeal found in medieval Europe centuries later. Clan identity shaped cultural belonging. Each tribe maintained its own animal totems: wolves, horses, hawks, bears, that symbolized ancestor protection. These totems decorated weapons, clothing, and banners. Education was practical. Boys learned survival skills, tracking, hunting, and riding. Girls learned textile artistry, leatherwork, livestock management, and communication. Both genders understood oral history, a crucial cultural pillar. Storytelling shaped identity. Elders told heroic tales around fires, preserving memory across generations. The Huns valued ancestry deeply. Warriors invoked their fathers during battle, believing spirits fought beside them. Hun burial customs also revealed cultural complexity. Nobles were buried with ornaments, gold belt plaques, silver bowls, weapons, and horse remains. Burial direction and body placement reflected astronomical and spiritual symbolism. Many graves aligned east-west, representing sunrise and afterlife journeys. Meanwhile, common burials contained wooden cups, leather items, and personal tools. These graves show love and respect for every individual. Archaeologists have found graves of disabled or elderly individuals who were cared for until death, proving the Huns supported their weak, not abandoned them. This evidence demolishes stereotypes of Hun culture as purely violent. They built communities through cooperation, shared responsibility, and empathy. Their society functioned because it valued equilibrium between personal freedom and collective necessity. Hun's social identity revolved around honor. A warrior's legacy meant everything. Who he fought for, how he died, who carried his story. Because they lacked written records, memory was sacred. Forgetting someone was the greatest disrespect. Thus, Hun society was more than a collection of raiders. It was a cultural organism shaped by faith, law, kinship, labor, and legacy. Another dimension of Hun civilization often misunderstood is their artistic and aesthetic culture. Although nomadic societies are frequently assumed to have limited material expression, the Huns produced remarkable art influenced by Persian, Chinese, Scythian, and Germanic traditions. Their lifestyle did not restrict artistic creativity. It shaped it into portable elegance. The most iconic form of Hun artistry was gold work. Archaeologists discovered breathtaking belt buckles, jewelry, brooches, and sword fittings decorated with animal-style designs, spiral antlers, eagles, panthers, wolves, and horses. These motifs symbolize strength, freedom, and spiritual guardianship. Hun craftsmanship blended hammered gold sheets with stone inlays, using garnet, turquoise, and glass. Their techniques show mastery of heat, pressure, and abstract patterning. Hun musical culture, although lost in sound, survives through instruments. Excavations reveal bone pipes, lyres, and drum fragments. Roman writers describe Hun warriors singing victory songs and lamentations after battle. Their voices echoed across the steppe, carrying emotion through poetry. Hun songs preserved genealogies, heroic deeds, and spiritual instruction. Without writing, music and story became libraries of knowledge. Hun clothing also expressed identity. They wore trousers, tunics, and fur-lined cloaks. Warriors decorated leather armor with bronze plaques and animal imagery. Nobles wore silk imported along Asian trade routes. Their boots were engineered for long riding, combining leather soles with felt interiors for warmth and grip. Hun aesthetic principles valued symmetry, motion, and natural imagery. Their horse equipment, bits, saddles, stirrup-like hooks, and bridles, featured elaborate metalwork. Horses themselves were groomed carefully. They braided manes, dyed hair, and adorned saddles with decoration. Pride in horses reflected pride in self, and weaponry was equally artistic. Swords bore distinctive hilts. Arrow quivers contained ornamentation. The Huns believed beauty empowered warriors spiritually. A sword was not just a tool, it represented the soul. Hun spirituality possessed deep symbolic layers. While not fully documented, several features stand out. They believed the sky was divine father, earth was divine mother, ancestors guided fate, fire provided purification, dreams carried prophecy, shamans wore masks, feathers, and animal skins. They entered trance states through chanting and drumming. They advised war councils, predicted seasons, and performed healing rituals. Shamans served as bridges between visible and invisible worlds. Hun funeral culture further reveals spiritual depth. They practiced horse sacrifice not because of cruelty, but because horses symbolized travel into the afterlife. Burial structures sometimes included fire pits, pottery vessels, and weapons pointing towards spiritual direction. Hun art also demonstrates cross-cultural blending. Some artifacts show Sasanian Persian motifs, suggesting trade or cultural borrowing. Other objects mirror Chinese steppe designs from centuries earlier. Their empire connected worlds that rarely interacted directly, making them cultural intermediaries. Hun cuisine remains overlooked. They consumed meat stews, fermented dairy, dried cheese, and mare's milk alcohol. They roasted meat over open flames and preserved fat for long winter journeys. Their diet was protein-rich, explaining their superior stamina. When Rome denied fair treatment to Gothic refugees, the Goths rebelled and killed Emperor Valens at Adrianople, one of the worst Roman defeats in history. Without the Huns pushing them, the Goths may never have entered Roman borders on such scale. Yet the Goths did not disappear. They lived under Hun rule for decades. The Ostrogoths, in particular, became dependent allies. Their king, Valamir, served Attila loyally. Thousands of Ostrogoth warriors fought as Hun auxiliaries at Chalons in 451 CE. Through this alliance, the Ostrogoths learned Hun cavalry tactics, military discipline, and strategy. After the fall of the Hun Empire, the Ostrogoths used this knowledge to conquer Italy under Theodoric the Great and form a medieval state bridging Roman and Germanic cultures. In this way, the Huns unintentionally prepared the Ostrogoths to become major European rulers. The Visigoths, too, interacted deeply with the Huns. At the Battle of Chalons, the Visigoths under King Theodoric I fought against Attila. Yet their earlier migrations into Roman lands occurred because of Hun pressure. Without Hun arrival, the Visigothic kingdom of Spain might never have formed. Another major tribe reshaped by the Huns were the Vandals. Before encountering the Huns, the Vandals lived along the Danube frontier. Under pressure from Hun attacks and intertribal conflict, they migrated to Gaul, then to Spain, and finally to North Africa, building the Vandal kingdom in Carthage. This kingdom became so strong that it sacked Rome in 455 CE, just 2 years after Attila's death. The irony is profound. The Huns never sacked Rome, but their indirect pressure helped create a kingdom that did. Even among steppe peoples, relationships were complex. Groups like the Syrians, Swabi, Rugians, Herulians, and Gepids formed both alliances and rivalries with the Huns. Many served as loyal federates, providing infantry to Hun armies. Others resisted and later led the revolt that shattered Hun power at the Battle of Nideo. The Gepids initially fought under Attila. Their king, Ardaric, became one of his most trusted generals. After Attila's death, Ardaric turned against the Huns in a legendary reversal, leading a coalition of subject tribes to victory. This revolt would not have been possible if the Huns had not forged federate relationships in the first place. Thus, from the beginning to the end, the Huns shaped and reshaped barbarian political geography. The Huns' alliances, rivalries, and conflicts with Germanic tribes demonstrate how political intelligence and strategy played major roles in their imperial vision. Unlike Rome, which often attempted to suppress or eradicate barbarian identity, the Huns encouraged tribal autonomy as long as loyalty remained. They built a confederation larger and more multicultural than anything Europe had seen before. One of the most fascinating relationships was between the Huns and the Franks. When Attila prepared his invasion of Gaul, the Franks were divided between two rival kings, one pro-Roman, one pro-Hun. Attila encouraged this division deliberately. He supported the Frankish ruler Childeric's rivals, deepening political fractures that prevented a unified Frankish front. The Franks later united only after Hun pressure vanished. This unification under Clovis resulted in the Frankish kingdom, the foundation of France. Again, Hun influence played indirect formative roles in shaping future European identity. Another major tribal connection was the Burgundians. Before contact with the Huns, the Burgundians had built a small kingdom along the Rhine, threatening Roman territory. After facing Hun attacks around 436 CE, they were devastated. Roman forces, working with Hun mercenaries, crushed Burgundian armies so thoroughly that the poet Sidonius Apollinaris described the Rhine turning red for miles. This event entered Germanic legend as the foundation of the Nibelungen cycle. The Burgundians later migrated into Eastern Gaul, founding the Kingdom of Burgundy, whose legacy shaped French medieval culture. The Alans, initially enemies, became allies. Alanic cavalry fought for Attila in Gaul, proved themselves disciplined and loyal, and influenced Hun warfare through hybrid tactics. Alanic identity survived through integration and later influenced Spanish history when Alans fought alongside Vandals and Suevi. The Suevi migrated into Iberia partly because Hun movements had destabilized their homeland. In Spain, they established the first medieval kingdom on the peninsula. Their political power became stepping stones toward later Spanish states. Even tribes the Huns did not conquer directly felt their impact. For example, the Saxons expanded into Britain during this period partly because Roman troops withdrew to defend against continental crises caused by Hun expansion. In other words, without the Huns, the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain might have unfolded very differently, or might have not occurred at all. The Huns also interacted with the Khazars and Bulgars, steppe peoples who rose after Hun collapse. These groups carried Hun military structure into the future. Bulgars eventually built a powerful medieval empire in the Balkans. Their identity traces culturally and genealogically to remnants of the Huns. Another crucial relationship was between the Huns and Slavic tribes. Hun expansion pushed Slavic populations westward, expanding their settlement zone. After Hun decline, Slavs filled power vacuums in Eastern Europe. Today's Ukraine, Belarus, Serbia, and Poland were shaped indirectly by Hun disruption. The multi-ethnic confederation under Attila, including Goths, Alans, and Slavs, reveals that the Huns did not view ethnicity as limitation. They valued ability and loyalty. Their army resembled a corporate merger of cultures, not a single racial identity. Romans called everyone Hunnic not to describe biology, but political belonging. And this is crucial. Europe today still reflects these ethnic rearrangements. Tribes displaced by the Huns founded medieval nations. Populations absorbed by the Huns contributed to future cultural blending. Thus, the Huns should not be seen as isolated nomads. They were architects of continental transformation. Perhaps the most misunderstood part of Hun history is their diplomatic intelligence while dealing with rival tribes. Attila did not simply conquer. He negotiated, manipulated, bribed, and divided enemies with expert strategy. His understanding of intertribal politics was extraordinary. One strategy Attila used was the divide and empower tactic. When tribes warred against each other, he stepped in offering protection to one side. This made formerly independent tribes spiritually and materially dependent on Hun authority. Another tactic was hostage diplomacy. Sons of tribal kings lived at Attila's camp as political guarantees. But rather than treating them as prisoners, Attila educated them in Hun ways and made them loyal friends. Many future kings across Europe grew up inside the Hun Empire. This produced generations of rulers sympathetic to Hun customs. For example, Ardaric of the Gepids likely developed lifelong loyalty to Attila through such systems. His later rebellion reflected not hate, but political realism after Attila's death removed central unity. The Huns also used marriage alliances. Attila married multiple noble women connected to different tribes, strengthening alliances. His marriages were not about romance, but diplomacy, an ancient political science practiced at expert level. Religious tolerance also strengthened alliances. The Huns did not force cultural conversion. Germanic tribes kept Christianity. Iranian tribes kept Zoroastrian traditions. Slavic tribes kept animism. This multicultural acceptance made the Hun Empire more flexible than Rome itself. Attila allowed tribes to govern themselves, collect taxes, and maintain internal law as long as tribute flowed and soldiers served. Roman governors micromanaged provinces. The Huns decentralized power. This decentralization created stronger loyalty and faster mobilization. Another brilliant diplomatic strategy was communication speed. Attila used mounted messengers to maintain constant contact across hundreds of miles. He received intelligence faster than sedentary societies could react. Many defeated tribes preferred Hun rule over Rome because Rome taxed them ruthlessly, forced conscription, and restricted religious identity. Under the Huns, tribes kept autonomy and gained security. This explains why so many Germanic tribes defected to Attila's side when he marched into Gaul. They did not join him by force. They admired him, feared Rome, or believed Attila represented future power. Even the Battle of Chalons, often described as Hun defeat, proves intertribal complexity. Many Germanic tribes fought against Attila, but many fought with him. The world was not simply Rome versus barbarians. It was a network of tribes choosing alliances based on survival. The Huns were masters at reading these survival instincts. They promised gold, peace, protection, and status, and delivered. Hun diplomacy also influenced later steppe empires. The Mongols, Turks, and Bulgars followed similar models centuries later. Finally, the intertribal relationships forged under Attila show why the Hun Empire collapsed so fast. It had been held together by a single leader's charisma. Without him, balancing dozens of tribal interests became impossible. But even in collapse, the intertribal empire changed the future. The tribes once united under Attila shaped medieval Europe, medieval Asia, and the roots of modern nations. Thus, the history of the Huns is not just military destruction. It is an extraordinary story of diplomacy, cultural blending, political engineering, and structural transformation across continents. You have now traveled through one of the greatest sagas human history has ever produced. Today, we learn how. The Huns rose from nomads to empire builders. Attila united tribes through strategy and charisma. Rome's future changed forever under Hun pressure. Cultures mixed, religions interacted, armies evolved. And how Attila's death collapsed an entire world order. The moral of this history is powerful. Civilizations rise not because they are large, but because they're disciplined, united, and filled with purpose. And civilizations fall when they forget what made them strong. The Huns showed us that. Speed can beat size, courage can beat walls, and leadership can shape continents. We also learned that history is not black and white. The Huns were not just destroyers, they were creators of change. Attila was not only fear, he was vision, diplomacy, and genius. And above everything, this story teaches one truth. Even the greatest empires end, but their influence never dies. Thank you for watching this journey with our channel. If you enjoyed today's epic history, then don't forget to return, because this channel will continue to bring more lost worlds, forgotten empires, and untold legends back to life. Your seat in the classroom of time is always waiting here. See you again on this channel, where the past never sleeps.